The Salamanders, originally known as the Dragon Warriors, were designated as the 18th Legion amongst the 20 original Space Marine legions forged by the Emperor of Mankind. Their Primarch, Vulkan, remains as one of the most enduring figures in Imperial history, not only due to his impact but his very physical constitution, as he has never been recorded as truly fallen, yet mysteriously he is absent, as his whereabouts and his purpose within the greater scope of humanity's ongoing struggle for the right to inherit the stars continues. These questions have defined the Salamanders throughout the millennia. The Legion itself was grievously tested during the opening engagements of the Horus Heresy, leading them to suffer catastrophic losses that limited their overall effectiveness and role in the greater galactic conflict. Yet from this veritable crucible of fire emerged warriors of unparalleled fortitude, who had been reforged much like is known to be their ability to forge the finest weapons from the hottest fires. And so they became a legion known for their unwavering will and their fierce, if unparalleled, devotion to protecting humanity at all costs. The Primarch Vulkan once said, "On the anvil of war, the strong are tested and the weak are made to perish. Thus are men's souls tested, as metal is forged in the fire." As one of the Loyalist first founding chapters, the Salamanders trace their lineage directly back to the 18th Legion during the Great Crusade, before their reunification with Vulkan. They were known as the Dragon Warriors, a name that reflected both their ferocity in battle and the legendary heart of what would eventually become their homeworld, the volcanic deathworld of Nocturne. And it was within this tumultuous planet that many of the Legion's core features were forged, shaped by both the harsh environment, the enduring culture of its mortal inhabitants, and the effect on the planet's radiation upon their gene seed. Unlike many chapters of the Adeptus Astartes, the Salamanders exhibit a profound concern for civilians, as they hold the idea that protecting the Emperor of Mankind's innocent subjects amongst the highest of duties, a principle born from their very enduring connection to the people of Nocturne. Unlike many other chapters, the Salamanders often maintain relationships with their mortal families, along with the communities they originally come from. It is not uncommon to find Salamanders residing amongst the very Nocturne tribes within specifically constructed chapter bastions across the planet's 7 sanctuary cities, even as the chapter's fortress monastery stands imposingly upon the moon Prometheus. They remain. In these roles, the Salamanders are revealed not only to be paramount warriors, but leaders of men, guiding their people through both spiritual and temporal matters, under the very ideal of the Promethean cult. This is a unique interpretation of the Imperial cult. The very saga of the Salamanders and the tale of Vulkan's reunion with the Emperor is one of the few consistently recounted narratives from the era of the Great Crusade, which is widely reported on. Known collectively as the Promethean Opus, its precise historical accuracy is seen as potentially uncertain, yet the legend itself holds more enduring than many of the other Primarchs' meetings with their Genesire. For 10,000 standard years, the Salamanders have stood as paragons of strength, honor, resilience, and nobility, a legacy that continues unbroken into the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. As Nocturne itself is a world defined by volatility, its surface constantly reshaped by volcanic activity, yet beneath this chaos lies a wealth of strategically valuable minerals, highly prized by the Adeptus Mechanicus. As such, humanity has called this perilous world home long before even the age of the Imperium, as people had been carving out an existence in a place where fire and rock dictate the very terms of survival. When the infant Vulkan first arrived on the volcanic world of Nocturne, he was discovered by the master smith of one of the planet's 7 principal settlements. This craftsman was a figure of considerable renown, and he took the young Primarch under his tutelage, imparting the full breadth of his knowledge in metalwork and metallurgy. In the matter of a few mere Terran years, Vulkan had grown into a figure of prodigious stature, his body formidable as was his intellect. The young Primarch did not merely absorb skills taught to him, he refined them and soon began instructing Nocturne's master smiths in techniques long thought lost to the galaxy since the very darkest of days from the Age of Strife. It was during this time that Vulkan's martial prowess first became evident, when Nocturne was faced by a massive raid of Drukhari. As each assault was costly in both lives and resources, the Primarch would then rise to the challenge, defeating the invaders by using a combination of raw strength, cunning, and strategy. In the aftermath of this victory, the people of Nocturne unanimously recognized Vulkan as their leader, a figure destined not only to defend them, but to elevate their civilization through skill and wisdom. Years later, the Emperor of Mankind would arrive upon Nocturne, seeking a reunion with his lost son. Unlike other encounters with his Primarchs, the Emperor chose not to announce himself with any ceremony or fanfare. Concealed by a subtle psychic glamour, he appeared as a stranger amidst celebrations honoring Vulkan's recent triumph. These festivals traditionally featured contests of both strength and endurance, and the very disguised Emperor decided to challenge Vulkan to a duel of deeds, decreeing that the victor would command the other's fealty. What followed would become the stuff of legends. The contests were beyond the capabilities of any ordinary mortal. Feats of endurance, displays of strength, and finally, a hunt for the world's largest native beast, the fire-dwelling reptiles known colloquially as salamanders, that would come to inspire the Legion's very name. Vulkan succeeded in slaying a colossal beast of his own, yet in his return he was met with a catastrophe. The earth beneath his very feet cracked and crumbled, as a surge of molten lava threatened to consume him in his entirety. Clinging with one hand to the rock and the other gripping the tail of his trophy, Vulkan's strength began to wane under the prolonged ordeal. Abandoning his prize would have ensured his survival, but he refused. It was then that the stranger appeared, yet his path was similarly obstructed by another river of molten rock. In a display as remarkable as Vulkan's own, the stranger dragged a creature of even greater size than the largest salamander ever previously recorded, and cast its massive body into the lava, forming a veritable bridge. Moments later, the stranger reached Vulkan, lifting him with a single hand, along with his hard-won prize, pulling them both to safety. Upon their return to the settlements, the elders declared Vulkan the victor, for the stranger, though victorious in strength, had returned empty-handed from the hunt. This event, celebrated across the worlds of the Imperium, marked the very moment where Vulkan's greatness was proven and recognized. It is a tale of courage, endurance, and an unyielding resolve, a veritable defining moment in the story of a Primarch who would become the heart and soul of the Salamanders Legion. Yet it was not the stranger who swore fealty that day, but Vulkan himself. The Primarch descended upon one knee, declaring that the man had won because he recognized that a man who values another's life above his own victory is a man worthy of service. In that instant, the stranger cast aside his psychic disguise, revealing himself in all his majesty. Thus the Master of Mankind revealed himself as the Emperor and showed that he had come to Nocturne to reunite with his lost son and to restore his people to the fold of humanity. From that moment on, Vulkan assumed the mantle of Primarch of the 18th Legion, thereafter known as the Salamanders, a name honoring both their volcanic homeworld and the legendary contest that had bound them once more to their gene father. Drawing from the hardy men of Nocturne, Vulkan shaped his legion into a fierce force renowned not only for their strength, but their courage, along with their ability for artistry and the precision from which they forged their weapons of war. The Salamanders became living embodiments of their Primarch's virtues, honor, resilience, and a devotion to safeguarding the lives of the innocents they defended. But the age of Imperial unity would not endure. Alongside the Iron Hands and the Raven Guard, the Salamanders were deceived by the War Master, Horus into taking part in the doomed first wave of Loyalist forces at the Dropsite Massacre of Isstvan V. There they were slaughtered, first by the fortified positions of the traitor legions, and then by betrayal from those legions forming the second wave of their assault. Amongst the so-called Shattered Legions, the Salamanders suffered some of the most staggering losses. Though enough survived to preserve the Legion from extinction, or from any severe genetic deviation, it seems records from this era remain largely fragmentary, leaving much of Vulkan's actions and those of his Legion shrouded in obscurity. The period immediately following the Galactic Civil War, known as the Horus Heresy, itself is particularly veiled, preserved perhaps only within the secretive and secured records of the Salamanders Librarius. The 18th Legion appears to have sired no immediate successors, their numbers so devastated by Isstvan V that they were precluded from being forced into the same division many a legion were during the second founding. Later chapters may carry the genetic legacy of the Salamanders, yet no definitive evidence for many of them exists during the second founding successor incident, meaning that any successor chapters would be a more recent affair. The adherence to the Codex Astartes varies. Their adherence to the Codex Astartes varies. In some respects, the Salamanders conformed to Reboot Guilliman's doctrines, while in others they deliberately diverge, as they field only 7 overstrength companies in the 41st Millennium. This exemplifies their selective compliance, even as the chapter otherwise follows the Codex with a large amount of diligence. The ultimate fate of Vulkan himself is another point of contention, as it is a matter that remains mostly discussed in conjecture. Many sources suggest he led his chapter for 3 millennia following the Horus Heresy before departing on a mission never revealed to the Imperium at large. Other records have him combating the legendary orc behemoth known as the Beast, yet scant records detail his deeds during this time. And yet the Primarch left behind sacred texts and artifacts, collectively known as the Tome of Fire and the Artifacts of Vulkan. Within this tome are clues to 9 potent technological relics of his own creation, willed to the Salamanders for their safekeeping. Chapter tradition holds that only when all 9 of the artifacts of Vulkan are rediscovered and reunited will the Primarch have deemed the Salamanders sufficiently tempered and having passed the ultimate trial. As of now, 5 of these have already been found and recovered. Then, legends dictate that he will return to his legion in a final war against the enemies of humanity, a promise of a reckoning and redemption that endures across the dark expanse of the 41st Millennium. The Salamander's gene seed is actually one of the more notable subjects of particular interest, as it is unique amongst the Adeptus Astartes and shrouded in no small degree of secrecy. Alongside the Space Wolves and the Alpha Legions, the Salamanders received a specially crafted gene seed known as the Trefoil, created for a specific yet undisclosed purpose by the Emperor himself. During the Unification Wars and the Great Crusade, these gene seeds were deliberately kept separate from those of the other legions, and it is noted by Call himself that the gene seed is as mutagenic as that of the Blood Angels and the Space Wolves, causing some of the most severe shifts in both physical appearance and biological aspects. And to this day, only the Emperor and a select few of his aides are believed to understand the rationale behind this specific policy. Extensive studies by Magos Biologus of the Adeptus Mechanicus indicate that the Salamander's gene seed is both remarkably stable and free from corruption, a rarity amongst the first founding legions. One distinctive trait, however, is the tendency for the Salamanders to exhibit slower reflexes than other chapters. The origin of this phenomenon remains highly debated. Some suggest it's a result from the extreme conditions of Nocturne, a high-gravity world that may have conditioned their neuromuscular systems. Others propose it is a psychological outcome from the chapter's doctrine, which emphasizes deliberation and discourages hastiness. Yet, in practice, the Salamander Space Marines can move with the speed and precision of any Astartes, encased in power armor, far surpassing the capabilities of ordinary humans. And they seem to have a higher resilience than many of the other legions. The interaction between their unique genetics and the intense radiation of Nocturne has produced striking physical features that are rather unique amongst other legions. The Salamanders typically possessed dark, almost obsidian, jet black skin that seems to absorb all light around them, and eyes that burn with an inner fire, glowing orange to red. While entirely superficial, it has been proven to be a tool of intimidation. More than one rebellion has been quelled by a single shot fired, and the following sight of these warriors alone being sufficient to enforce compliance. Perhaps the most extraordinary manifestation of their gene seed is a trait known as firesight. This specialized visual sensitivity allows salamanders to perceive infrared emissions, focusing on heat signatures invisible to ordinary eyes, even to those of the Adeptus Astartes. This has meant that a special substance was to be integrated into the dermis of their ceramite armor and woven through their electrotapestral strands in the robes and standards, and even applied to the flanks of their tanks. Millennia ago, salamanders' artificers refined materials capable of generating precisely tuned pulses of heat detectable by their firesight. This substance was integrated into the dermis of their ceramite armor, woven through their electrotapestral strands of their robes and standards, and even applied to the flanks of their tanks. When connected to the noosphere, these signals become perceptible to the salamanders, while remaining undetectable to others, allowing sublevels of tactical communication and hidden strategic markers that can be traced through the air with the firesight. Despite these enhancements, the chapter continues to rely heavily on sensory augmentation provided by standard issue Astartes power armor. Together with their firesight and their natural resilience, these systems make the salamanders formidable warriors, capable of executing complex maneuvers in even the most extreme of environments. Their genetics, honed by millennia of conflict and the harsh environment of Nocturne, have produced a legion uniquely adapted to the defense of humanity and the pursuit of perfection in both combat and craft, to such a scale that they would make the Emperor's children jealous, as their craftsmanship is only rivaled by the most expert of blood angels who have honed one of their virtues in craftsmanship. Beyond their extraordinary genetic ability known as firesight, the Salamander's gene seed confers additional traits which distinguish them significantly from other Space Marine chapters. They exhibit a remarkable tolerance for extreme temperatures, alongside radiation. This is also bolstered by an enhanced capability for cellular repair, allowing them to endure environments that would prove lethal to any ordinary Astartes. These abilities, combined with their natural resilience, form the biological foundation for the Legion's endurance and strength. Guided by the teachings of Vulkan, the Salamanders are renowned not only for their martial prowess, but for their compassion towards citizens of the Imperium. Unlike most chapters, the Salamanders, excluding specialized units such as the Fire Drakes, live amongst the civilian population of Nocturne, serving as guardians, exemplars, and caretakers. While some critics have denounced their closeness as a vulnerability, the Salamanders have consistently viewed it as a defining strength. Even the High Lords of Terra have on occasion condemned this practice, yet the chapter persists, seeing the protection of humanity as a duty inseparable from their roles as warriors. This ethos extends to diplomacy. The Salamanders are often the first to offer overtures of alliance to other imperial forces, a reflection of both pragmatism and their Primarchs' teaching. Although the chapter adheres to the Codex Astartes, it also follows the doctrines of the Promethean cult, a faith emphasizing self-reliance, loyalty, and sacrifice. Collective decision-making is highly valued, and the people of Nocturne, alongside the Salamanders themselves, routinely convene councils of elders in order to deliberate on significant matters, a process reminiscent of the quorums of Macragge. Promethean iconography is rich with symbols of the forge, fire, and hammers, alongside other tools of craftsmanship being strewn about everywhere, reflecting the chapter's roots as master blacksmiths, and in battle, this manifests with a pronounced preference for flamers, melta-weapons, alongside thunderhammers, favoring close-range engagements without sacrificing versatility. In broader Space Marine combat doctrines, early training in metallurgy and weapon maintenance ensures that every Salamander is capable of performing moderate repairs on their armor, allowing any tech marines to have a significantly greater amount of autonomy to repair heavier equipment. This self-sufficiency also allows the chapter's artificers to devote their efforts into the creation of master-crafted weapons, artificer armor, and even tactical dreadnought armor. The chapter is also known for its prolific use of Land Raider Redeemers, forging a tactical doctrine that emphasizes durability and firepower over mobility in certain scenarios. Yet, the harsh conditions of Nocturne impose their own limitations. Fluctuating gravity complicates the training and development of rapid units such as land speeders, bikers, and even those designated to use jump packs, leading to the chapter favoring the use of Devastator and Terminator squads instead. Salamanders are trained in order to persevere even in the face of total loss, making them capable of holding positions for months on end, even after the fall of their entire squad. This is a direct reflection of the Promethean cult's influence on their collective psyche. Before each engagement, a brander priest bestows upon each salamander a brand, a cult ritual mark of respect for the chapter. Only veterans earn the right to bear these brands upon their faces, as a visible testament to their dedication, endurance, and service. The rituals of the Promethean cult form the spiritual and cultural backbone of the Salamanders chapter, shaping not only their approach to warfare, but their understanding of life, death, and service. Amongst the sacred traditions, a number stand out for their complexity, intensity, and the profound lessons they impart upon the bearer. One of these most ancient and harrowing is known as the Burning Walk, a solitary pilgrimage through the vast pyre deserts of Nocturne. It is to be undertaken by those seeking final absolution. This is often the aged, the infirmed, or the grievously wounded. Some salamanders select this path in order to restore a troubled soul and test their resolve, facing the unforgiving desert and its elements as a crucible for their body, mind, and spirit. Remarkably, to date, only a single Astartes is known to have completed this trial. This was Apothecary Fugus of the Third Company. His return remains a story of renown in reverent tones, a rare testament to the endurance and fortitude demanded by the Burning Walk. Rituals of intermittent and ascension followed the death of a captain, marking both a commemoration of the fallen and the elevation of his successor. In these ceremonies, the remains of the deceased are affixed to a vast slab of black marble coated in ceramite, and then lowered into the lava flow within a volcanic basin. This task is performed by two Astartes robed in the traditional garbs of Nocturne's metalworkers, who pass chains twice the size of an Astartes fist and etched with symbols of the forge, the flame, and the anvil along with the hammer, through their hands. The chains themselves are at this point red hot from the lava below, branding the encumbrance palms with scarred emblems. Precision and unity are paramount. Any misalignment will result in an irregular brand, a mark of shame that must be expunged in disgrace. Once the fallen has been committed to fire, the ritual of ascension begins. The prospective captain is stripped of all but his ceremonial sash and branded with the marks of his new rank upon his chest and right shoulder. Standing upon the dais, he is enveloped by a pillar of flame from below. A momentary trial by fire, if you will. Following this crucible, the regent of Prometheus addresses the ascendant in the following: Vulkan's fire beats in my breast, to which the captain will respond, with it I shall smite the foes of the emperor. The regent bids the captain to then rise, officially recognizing his authority and linking him indelibly to the chapter's sacred traditions. These rituals extend to the daily lives and campaigns of the chapter. At the onset of a new engagement, each salamander constructs his own pyre, separate from his brothers, returning only when the flames reach their apex. In solitude, they anoint their armor and meditate upon the tenets of the Promethean cult, reaffirming their loyalty, discipline, and unity within the chapter. In death, the salamanders maintain these rituals even when a warrior falls far from home. If a body cannot be returned to Nocturne for ceremonial cremation in the Pyrium beneath Mount Deathfire, the chapter may perform a local ceremony during or after the campaign. Each fallen fireborn is honored individually, his pyre tended to by his squad mates or his closest brothers. Comrades trust their arms into the flame, offering personal gestures of respect, perhaps even a marker of lament, a spoken word of remembrance, and another intimate tribute. This solemn observance ensures that each salamander in life and in death is bound to the chapter by fire, sacrifice, and devotion. The salamander's very approach to warfare is as distinctive as their culture and physiology. While capable of operating in any theater and under virtually any conditions, the chapter demonstrates a particular aptitude for close quarters combat, excelling with both flame and melta weaponry. During the Great Crusade, they also made extensive use of Vulkite weapons, instruments of incendiary devastation that combined precision with their destructive firepower. This proficiency reflects not only their natural resilience, but the Promethean cult's emphasis on technical skill, discipline, and a mastery over both the body and the tool. Each Astartes is trained to maintain and operate a complex amount of weaponry and machinery both in and outside of the field, ensuring the Legion's firepower remains at peak efficiency under even the most extreme of conditions. Tactically, the Salamanders favor the deployment of mass heavy armored units alongside fire-wielding infantry, advancing methodically to smother opposition in a combination of incendiary weaponry and concentrated heavy fire. This approach has proven devastating in both offensive and defensive operations, allowing them to dominate fortifications, repel boarding actions, and methodically reduce enemy populations to naught but ash. They exhibit an extraordinary amount of patience in combat, often waiting for the enemy to enter the optimal range of their flame-based weaponry before striking en masse, turning the entire battlefield into a controlled furnace where hesitation by the foe will be met with a swift and overwhelming amount of retribution. The chapter maintains an unusually large reserve of Terminator armor, and it is a testament to not just their craftsmanship, but to their technical acumen. Only a chapter with a long-standing tradition of metallurgy and mechanical expertise could sustain a field of such armor in the quantities observed amongst the Salamanders. Their proficiency ensures that these elite warriors remain as durable and effective as possible, reinforcing their legion's reputation for resilience and precision, along with their relentless nature. The Salamanders' tactical doctrine reflects a duality of their chapters: disciplined artisans and protectors, yet it shows them as uncompromising warriors whose mastery over fire and armor renders them uniquely formidable in innumerable battlefields across the Imperium. In the Great War of the Horus Heresy, the Salamanders Legion occupied a central yet perilous position amidst the chaos of the galaxy. Betrayed, struck down, and laid waste to repeatedly, they nevertheless demonstrated their unyielding loyalty and a steadfast honor that was surpassed by few, if any. Few Space Marine legions have paid so high a price for their fidelity to the Emperor, and fewer still have so consistently shed their blood beyond measure in the defense of mankind. Time and time again, the Salamanders have risen from the ashes of devastation. Each time they are tempered like the legendary steel forged in their volcanic homeworld, unbroken, undefeated, and resolute in their purpose. The origins of the Legion, known as the Dragon Warriors, and later the Salamanders, remains something shrouded in obscurity and no small amount of mystery. As with several Proto-Legion groupings, at the close of the Unification Wars, much of their founding and initial intake was lost to history, in particular due to the Emperor deliberately imposing secrecy upon the early Space Marine project in order to safeguard the nascent legions from hostile interference and espionage, alongside from the tamperings of the universe's worst mother, who sent all of their sons into literal hell. The early deployment of the Legion's gene strains also remains poorly documented, obscured beyond the reach of modern records. However, only a handful of the Emperor's closest confidants would have known the precise intent behind these early arrangements, and with their deaths, they have taken these secrets with them to the other side. The Dragon Warriors were formed as part of a select trio of legions, which included the 6th, known as the Space Wolves, and the 20th, known as the Alpha Legion. Sometimes this grouping is referred to as the Trefoil. These three were deliberately veiled from the other legions during their creation, a fact that is recognized but rarely discussed by their contemporaries. This isolation created a subtle yet lasting distance between them and the wider brotherhoods of the Space Marines, particularly in regard to the origins of their early initiates. While rumors and distrust would later affect the Space Wolves and the Alpha Legion in different ways, the Salamanders' conduct, guided by the example of their gene-sire Vulkan, gradually mitigated such concerns. As on the outset of the Great Crusade circa 798 M30, the 18th Legion carried a far bolder and more bellicose reputation than it would later bear. Their defining early action was the assault on the Tempest galleries in the waning days of the Unification War, and it would set the tone for their lasting legacy and the Legion's overall destiny. Against impossible odds, the Dragon Warriors achieved victory, though at a catastrophic cost. Their active strength would fall from 20,000 Space Marines to scarcely more than 1,000. Yet in securing this triumph, they claimed a place of glory and honor amongst the records of the Imperium, as their Legion ranks would be swiftly and intentionally replenished with successive waves of recruits, and their battlefield reputation also ensured preferential access to war gear and supplies, unlike their kin known as Revenants. Nevertheless, this temporary depletion delayed their participation in the initial expeditions of the early Great Crusade. For the first few decades, the 18th Legion was rarely deployed as a whole. Instead, its warriors were assigned in smaller detachments to reinforce expeditionary forces or other Space Marine chapters, to operate within rogue trader-led campaigns, or to even intervene in emergent crises behind advancing Crusade lines. And so they proved themselves to be indispensable in combating such threats, such as the unpredictable emergence of space hulks, Xenos Corsair raiders, and the newly disturbed dangers arising from human colonization across the stars. Through these fragmented deployments, the Salamanders honed their skills in both adaptation and resilience, ensuring that even when scattered across a galaxy, they upheld the honor, the Emperor, and the legacy of the Primarch, despite not having met him yet. Their early history, though partly lost to the shadowed records and the deliberate secrecy that is all too well known as a part of the Imperium, provides a brief overview, if not a window, into a chapter forged in trial and tempered in fire, a force which would become one whose resolve would endure for millennia unshaken. During the initial decades of the Great Crusade, the warriors of what would become the Salamanders were often the sole Astartes contingent assigned to critical operations, compelling them into close coordination with other Imperial forces, frequently acting as spearhead or command elements with other non-gene-forged humans. And while direct Imperial compliance operations were comparatively few in number, the Dragon Warriors' battle honors became both extensive and varied. Their victories spanned engagements against alien raiders, insurgent human factions, and sudden threats from the far reaches of the Imperium, marking them both as saviors and harbingers of bloody conflict. For the Imperial Army units, assignments alongside the 18th was a grim signal of dangerous forthcoming engagements, which would certainly demand the ultimate sacrifice from quite a few of them, be it breaking a siege, intercepting a counterattack, or holding the line against an alien onslaught in order to prevent the loss of civilian life, long enough for other fully functional legions to provide reinforcements. The Dragon Warriors themselves would face every challenge head-on. No odds were too great for them, no loss of materiel too severe for the Legion to fail in achieving its objective. This relentless commitment to triumph against overwhelming odds and adversity earned the Legion a paradoxical reputation, admired for their courage, yet whispers persisted of them being addicted to peril, as their valor was viewed as teetering on the brink of utter recklessness. In the most extreme cases, such as the legendary Manticore Cataclysm, retreat was inconceivable. Tactical procedure often dictated a withdrawal within certain parameters, yet the 18th fought on, paying dearly in blood and sacrifice for its unyielding standard of courage and selfless service. Their steadfastness won them favors amongst certain circles in the imperial court and high command. yet it drew ire and concern from others. Lord Commander Actia of the 13th Legion, the Ultramarines, publicly remarked following the events of Manticore that the 18th Legion carried with them the seeds of their own destruction. He compared their indomitable will to the chaotic tendencies of the 5th Legion, the White Scars, and the instability of the 3rd Legion, the Emperor's Children, whose gene seed deficiencies had yet to be rectified at the time of the comment. The 18th Legion's unique development and interrupted evolution, coupled with their relentless attrition in these early solar decades, ensured that the Legion was never pushed to attaining the full complement of warriors prescribed by High Command and the War Council of the Emperor. Officers and battle brothers remained increasingly isolated from their counterparts in other legions, separated by both circumstance and deliberate choice. As the Great Crusade proceeded into its 4th decade, questions about the ultimate survival of the 18th began to circulate openly, and despite their storied courage, their path had become perilously narrow, their triumphs hard won, and their continued existence far from assured. The following are chronological records of their most notable campaigns, starting at the earliest onset of M30 and the closing years of the Unification Wars. While it is possible that the transhuman warriors of the 18th Legion saw action prior to their campaign in the Caucasus Wastes, records of any real engagements were either deliberately expunged or sealed at the highest levels, potentially even lost to the vestiges of time. Thus, the first officially recognized battle honor for the then unmatched 18th Legion was the assault on the Tempest Galleries, an operational undertaking during the overthrow of the Entrech of the Caucasus Wastes on Terra. This early campaign would prove seminal in shaping the character, the doctrine, and the enduring reputation of the Legion for generations to come. The conquest of the Caucasus Wastes marked one of the final great battles of the Unification Wars, solidifying the Emperor as the uncontested master of Terra. Yet this victory was not swift nor easily assured, as the mutated eugenicist oligarchs ruling the Caucasus Wastes wielded technologies dating back to the pre-Imperium Age of Strife, and their military forces ranged from heavily armored, gene-augmented Urcasis troops, analogs to the Emperor's earliest days of the Thunder Warriors, to narcotically enslaved covens of powerful psychers. Their strongholds lay hidden deep within the hollowed mountains of these wastes, and shielded by near-impenetrable power field webs, rendering previous assaults catastrophic. Earlier Imperial attempts had cost nearly 10,000 Thunder Warriors and over 1 million additional casualties, leaving the wastes contained but not conquered. When the hour of Imperial vengeance would finally arrive, the Emperor would leave nothing to chance. Forces from 6 proto-legions of Legions Astartes were assembled, alongside the massed force of the majority of the Legio Custodes and innumerable tributary armies, alongside mechanized battalions and war bands bearing the Raptor and Lightning banner of the Unification Wars. Yet it was a nascent 18th Legion that received the foremost trust of responsibility, tasked with what many deemed as a near self-termination mission, as they were to penetrate the subterranean Tempest Galleries, 100-kilometer long, meaning it was 62.14 miles, or 1,094 football fields long. However, in this household, we prefer true freedom units as measurements, so 50,000 bald eagles, wingtip to wingtip in length. This network of tunnels and caverns housed geothermal furnaces that powered the Ethnarchy's formidable defenses, equipped with scores of newly forged termite boring machines fitted with the latest mechanicum technologies from Mars. The 18th Legion, numbering approximately 20,000 Astartes, mounted these untested designs and drove into the churning earth at the periphery of the wastes. From that moment, all communication ceased, as Imperial psychers strained to maintain contact, yet the assault forces seemingly vanished into the unknown. As hours stretched to days and days into weeks, the Emperor's waiting armies remained posted for their grand assault, yet no signal or report emerged from within the infernal depths. Pressured by his high commanders, the Emperor is said to have silenced all anxiety with a single decree: "They shall not fail me. They will return from the fire. Thus it shall ever be." And it was so that the Legion endured, completing the mission in its entirety, a mission which few could have emerged as unscathed as they were, or even imagined surviving, cementing the early legend of a force willing to confront the very bowels of Terra itself and remained unbroken. Reports claim that mere moments after the Emperor's decree, great tremors shook the Caucasus wastes, their reverberations being felt as far as Gordak and the Jade Citadel of Hangul. In their wake, the power webs no longer shielded the wastes, and the forces of the Emperor would be able to fully unleash their wrath upon the region, reducing it to utter and complete ruination. The last ethnarch of the Caucasus wastes would then be captured, dragged in chains to the imperial prisons of Kagbang Moguru, and the secrets that had sustained his dominion were claimed by the now uncontested master of Terra. For the 18th Legion, no word emerged from them for weeks on end. Then, in the closing days of the campaign, far from the wastes, a long-dormant volcano near Klokstags shattered, and one termite machine emerged from the rubble, carrying barely over 1,000 survivors of the Legion. Those who breached the carbonium-lined caverns of the Tempest Galleries encountered a world unlike any other, a landscape alien even to the later expeditions of the Great Crusade. Gigantic spindle machines churned over seas of molten metal drawn from the planet's very core, sending coronas of blistering lightning across the dark, airless expanse, while unfathomable machines scuttled like enormous spiders alongside silicate webs. Here, in this furnace beyond mortal endurance, the 18th Legion found no human opposition, for nothing living had ever trodden this place in millennia. Instead, they faced the defenders of the ancient engines themselves, fire-blackened service automata, programmed since before the Age of Strife to maintain the facility, reacted to intruders as a living body's immune system would respond to an infection, as thousands of Tempest automata swarmed upon the Legion Astartes in unceasing, nigh implacable attacks. Only by applying massive kinetic force at extremely close ranges to their articulated joints could the legions disable them. The 18th Legion would endure with a mixture of stoic resilience and self-terminating fury. Individual legionaries hurled themselves into the machines, sacrificing their lives to save their brothers, demonstrating a technical aptitude for which they would later gain renown for, demonstrating the nascent signs of the technical aptitude that they would later be renowned for. The survivors would then begin scavenging the wrecks of the automata, repairing and augmenting their own war gear, and eventually turning a captured control system against their makers, sending mindless berserkers crashing into the enemy's lines, as a perilous stalemate would be achieved, but at a catastrophic cost, as fewer than a third of the Legion's original forces remained, while the Tempest Gallery's ancient machine spirit continued to constantly manufacture new robotic defenders beyond their capability to destroy. Recognizing the strategic reality, the 18th devised a rather bold plan, committing all their remaining forces into a single decisive strike in order to destroy the central power transmission node in the largest discovered chamber. Even if this vast generator spindle survived, they would sever the flow of energy and cripple the Ethnarch's upper defenses. Therefore, a two-pronged assault would be formed. The 1st Division mounted a diversionary attack to confuse the enemy, while the larger, more central force would assault the power node itself. This was a mission understood by all to be certainly fatal. Here, the character of the 18th shone the most clearly. Commanders acquiescing to the wishes of rank and file would then assign soldiers to the central assault by lottery, not from lack of volunteers, but rather because every last Astartes fervently wished to take part. While the attack commenced, legionaries surged from their holdouts and defensive redoubts, primarily wielding improvised power fists, thunderhammers, and shock cannons, alongside cutting saws fashioned from shattered remnants of defeated Tempest automata. Their courage and discipline, alongside their ingenuity, would then come to define the 18th Legion, as this tale of near impossible survival and unparalleled technological skill, alongside the knowledge that they were unwaveringly loyal to the Emperor, would become common knowledge. With the full reserves and munitions alongside manpower committed. Nothing would be held back, as the 18th Legion struck with both precision and ferocity, confronting the inhuman intelligence that controlled the Tempest galleries. This artificial mind responded with cold machine-like logic, dividing its forces and countering each incursion with ruthless efficiency. Yet the Legion's plan held, as the concentrated main assault force smashed through the defenses and into the Great Gallery, its few remaining dreadnoughts and rapier batteries leading the way. The response of the Tempest automata was equal parts immediate and brutal. Like a hive of disturbed insects, the machines surged forward, their scorched black metal bodies snapping and tearing at the legionaries across the silicate bridges, which were suspended over the molten seas and hurricane-like coronas of corpuscent lightning. Hundreds fell on both sides within seconds. Machine and Astartes alike slammed into the burning abysses, while several power conduits sparked violently and bodies erupted in sheets of fire and molten shrapnel. The air itself boiled, turning blood and oil into steam within the superheated environment. Step by agonizing step, the 18th fought forward, paying for each inch with a dozen lives. The towering power node at the gallery's center would then come into view. It was then that the Kraken emerged, a vast articulated engine, the largest of all the Tempest gallery's machines. It rose from the depths, its black diamond armored scales glistening in the molten metal, flowing like rivers across its body, its coils so massive they could have crushed battle titans with ease. The Legion's weapons would then prove almost useless against this Leviathan. The survivors were forced into a fighting retreat, one which they knew all too surely would fail, as the silicate strands were severed one by one, sending hundreds upon hundreds of Astartes into the molten abyss below. What occurred next remains shrouded in both mystery and uncertainty. As the final garbled transmission from the Great Gallery described a colossal grav-propelled tunneling sphere, a weapon of the Tempest automata, crashing through the gallery wall, passing the Kraken-like engine and striking directly at the node's nexus. The most plausible explanation for this was that one of the diversionary assault groups seized control of one of the tunneling spheres, turning it into a last-ditch weapon of destruction. Regardless of its origins, the Legion's intervention, or a chaotic machine accident, the impact destroyed the central node. The gallery itself collapsed, destroying everything around, blowing out the surrounding tunnels and caverns, then triggering earthquakes, where tremors would be felt across the region. The explosion appears to have annihilated the governing machine spirit of the galleries, and in its aftermath, the automata fell silent and inert. The spindle generators then sank silently into the fire below, and the vast ancient machines never moved again. Of the 20,000 strong 18th Legion, scarcely 1,000 survived, and many of those would have to be interred into dreadnoughts. Those survivors were also noted to be scattered across the breadth and width of the entire galleries. Many engaged in diversionary actions at the periphery, demonstrating the characteristic fortitude and ingenuity that they would become known for centuries later. Several even managed to repair damaged termite transports to facilitate the arduous journey back to the surface. Upon their return, the Emperor personally gathered the survivors and bestowed upon them the laurels of victory for the campaign against the Ethnarch, a recognition forever inscribed in their motto, "In fire and darkness tested." This battle proved prophetic, establishing an early standard of sacrifice, ingenuity, and triumph against insurmountable odds, which would become a common trait for the Legion therein, throughout the entirety of the Great Crusade, and even the Horus Heresy. Notably, the survivors also brought with them remnants of pre-Age of Strife metallurgy and machinecraft. While the secrets were shared with the Imperial Command, much of this knowledge was retained in a perfectly intact state by the Legion, further cementing their reputation as both warriors and artisans of unmatched skill. Following the harrowing ordeal in the Tempest galleries, the 18th Legion continued to forge its reputation in the fires of war. One of their next major undertaking was the Sendak campaign. The precise dates of said campaign is lost to time, along with no small amount of security within early imperial records. This operation led the 18th to fight alongside 7 other legions on a world shaped by alien hands and located at the outermost edges of the Sol system. The campaign itself was waged in near total darkness, and the planet's surface was a veritable labyrinth of twisted terrain and hostile technologies. Yet, through their unmatched discipline and courage, the Legion secured the system, marking the first time in centuries that humanity had uncontested dominion over the Sol system since the very onset of the Age of Strife. It was during these early campaigns that the 18th Legion finally encountered the figure that would define their future, their Primarch, Vulkan. In the account of the first meeting, the Legion found itself making a last desperate stand against a vast horde of orcs, as they fought not for glory, but to buy time for fleeing civilians, fully aware that many of them might not survive the engagement. Into this veritable burning crucible, Vulkan arrived, cutting through the greenskin horde with a devastating force, using a hammer and striking at the green abominations as a hammer strikes an anvil. As the battlefield smoldered and burned with the bodies of orcs, the Legion finally met their Primarch. In a gesture rarely recorded in the records of Imperial history, Vulkan knelt in respect to his sons, declaring all of them equals and acknowledging the lives that they had saved. The 18th Legion rose now as one, inspired and forever changed by the presence of their Genesire. Shortly thereafter, the Legion took part in the liberation of the Shorax cluster, operating alongside the Iron Hands as part of the 184th Expeditionary Fleet. The cluster itself had been overrun by orcs and their nigh unending warbands, leaving the system in an eternal, perpetual state of ruin. The campaign was fierce and unforgiving, pushing both men and machine to their very limits. It is recorded that Primarch Ferrus Manus, the leader of the Iron Hands, jested that his arm had grown weary from so much killing. Vulkan, ever measured, is said to have replied, "The flesh is weak, but the deeds endure." These words would echo throughout the histories of the Iron Hands, as their motto would be a perversion of said statement. For the 18th Legion, however, it marked another step in their emergence as both stalwart defenders of humanity and as a force whose deeds are born of discipline, ingenuity, and unyielding loyalty. In the early decades of the Great Crusade, the Imperium undertook the compliance of 154-4, a campaign that would prove unusual even by the extraordinary standards of the 18th Legion. The planet, known to its inhabitants as Isstvan, was brought into imperial compliance in the year 001 M31. Under circumstances that blurred the lines between conquest, revelation, and unsettling discovery. Isstvan had initially been scouted by the Iron Hands' 154th Expeditionary Fleet, led by the Primarch Ferrus Manus. The planet immediately drew the attention of many for a singular anomaly, a rare coexistence of Eldari and human populations. Upon further investigation, it became evident that these humans were descendants of Nocturne, the ancestral homeworld of the Salamanders, who had been freed from Drukhari captivity by their craftworld kin centuries prior. The Imperial response was swift and decisive. Vulkan, leading the Salamanders, joined the Death Guard and the Iron Hands under their respective Primarchs and brought the combined might of their legions down upon this horrid abomination. Isstvan itself was largely underdeveloped and almost completely inhospitable to human settlements, but its material wealth and strategic value demanded Imperial control. Yet the campaign was far from straightforward. The Eldar defenders, seers, warlocks, and other potent psychers held positions upon their planet, and the semi-feral human tribes appeared more sympathetic to the alien presence than to their imperial liberators. Despite these complications, the Astartes triad overcame the Eldar forces with relative ease. The discovery of this structure was guided by a remembrancer attached to the Salamanders, with whom Vulkan engaged in a brief yet unsettling dialogue before the assault. After the battle, Vulkan observed that the remembrancer was loitering near an arch, only for the figure to vanish suddenly. Pursuing the mystery, Vulkan descended with his elite pyre guard into the subterranean chambers beneath the arch. There, a crude warding ceremony was underway, conducted by the tribal human priests who were preparing to sacrifice a captured Dark Eldar witch. Vulkan's realization was immediate. The arch was not merely symbolical, it was in fact a webway portal, though neither he nor his legionaries had recognized it as such at the time. Vulkan recalled similar structures from his youth on Nocturne, recalling the horrors of the Dark Eldar raids through such gates. The Eldar of Isstvan had been able to seize control of the portal, defeating their Dark Eldar kin and inadvertently liberating the human population. The human tribes, terrified at the prospect of the return of their alien oppressors, had prepared to sacrifice the captured Dark Eldar as a protective measure. The Remembrancer, later understood to be the Emperor himself in disguise, had likely monitored the proceedings closely, ensuring the Imperial strategy aligned with their wider objectives in the Great Crusade. In the aftermath of this, Vulkan made a decisive judgment. The population of Isstvan had been deemed irredeemably corrupted and unsuited for integration into the Imperium, so they were subjected to the Purging Flames. The scoured world was renamed Caldera, a Nocturne light, and turned into a Nocturne-like dead world, now ready for settlement and resource exploration under Imperial oversight. What remained was both a testament to the Legion's unwavering resolve and a grim reminder at the cost of Imperial compliance and expanding the Emperor's realms. When Primarch Vulkan was restored to the Imperium, it was upon the volcanic world of Nocturne, a planet whose harshness and fury would shape both him and his Legion. Nocturne was a dead world, a death world, a planet riven by fire, radiation, and catastrophic tidal forces wrought by its malshapen moon, Prometheus. Mineral wealth was abundant there, gemstones, precious metals, but human habitability was sparse, and the planet's surface was a veritable proving ground of continuous destruction. Amidst the dangers of Nocturne, life found a way and endured. Highly evolved predators and colossal megafauna had adapted to its extremes, and the human inhabitants themselves became a hardy and resilient people. Resistance to high gravity, radiation, and climate beyond ordinary human norms. Their culture, though technologically pre-industrial, following the travesties of old night, remained sophisticated and socially cohesive enough to be infused with values of stoic resistance, perseverance, and courage. The people of Nocturne called the world the Anvil, a crucible of men and women where they were forged most intently during the time of trials, when Prometheus approaches the closest to the planet, stirring tempests, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and the awakening of the great beasts of Nocturne from their subterranean layers. Vulkan's arrival on Nocturne is chronicled in the Promethean Opus, a source of much imperial knowledge concerning his life. Like all Primarchs, he was separated from the Emperor during infancy and scattered across a galaxy through the warp by the machinations of the Chaos Gods, aided by the universe's worst mother, Erda, who literally flung her children through hell. Without a plan, without an idea where they would go, and without considering what would happen to many of them. Vulkan's capsule landed on the feudal world of Nocturne, descending like a blazing comet into the hands of Nbal, a master blacksmith known locally as the Blacksmither, in the city settlement of Hesard. Nbal, guided by prophecies of the Promethean cult, recognized the child as a savior and named him Vulkan. The Primarch matured at an extraordinary speed, much like his kin, and by the age of 3 Terran years, he had reached full stature, surpassing any man on Nocturne in both size and strength. His intellect and skill were also equally remarkable. He quickly improved the already formidable metalworking techniques of Nocturne's smiths, demonstrating a capacity for a craft and the ability of innovation far beyond mortal limits. Vulkan embraced the culture that had adopted him. Working with Mbel, he forged tools and aided in the hunting of great saurians, along with other predatory beasts stirred by the planet's fiery tempests. The Promethean Opus recounts that in Vulkan's 4th year, his hometown faced a slave raid by the Drukhari, a nightmarish Eldari offshoot of slavers known as the Dusk Wraith, who sought the hardy people of Nocturne for sport. While the populace hid, Vulkan refused to take shelter. Armed with only a pair of blacksmith's hammers, he rallied the people and personally drove the assault back, reportedly slaying over 100 Drukhari warriors. Word of his heroism spread quickly, as the leaders of Nocturne's 7 principal settlements came to pay homage to the young Primarch, pledging henceforth to resist rather than cower from their forces. It was through these events that Vulkan became known as Fireborn, a warrior whose supernatural strength tore slave barges from the skies, and whose granite-like fists repelled the poisoned blades of the Dusk Wraiths. In this proving ground of fire and conflict, Vulkan's legend was forged as a living exemplar of courage, resilience, and the relentless defiance that would define both him and the Salamanders Legion up until the 41st Millennium. In the aftermath of Vulkan's victory over the Drukhari, the people of Nocturne held a grand tournament celebrating his feats of strength, endurance, and craftsmanship, traditions long cherished amongst the planet's hardy tribes. During this opening ceremony, which were recorded to have occurred in 832 M30, a stranger appeared. His skin was unusually pale against the dark, swarthy complexions of Nocturnians, and his garments were fashioned of strange materials, wholly unfamiliar to the pre-industrial populace. The stranger requested only a chance to compete, claiming that he could surpass any man. He provoked laughter from the crowd by doing such, who all saw the comparison to a superhuman man like Vulkan as preposterous. Yet Vulkan, amused by the audacity, accepted the challenge. The wager was simple. The loser would swear eternal loyalty and obedience to the victor. With a knowing smile, Vulkan agreed. The contest spanned 8 days as a series of grueling trials testing strength, skill, and endurance would go on. The populace of Nocturne witnessed what can only be described as a battle of demigods, as both combatants displayed feats far beyond mortal capabilities. In many events, the results were declared a draw, as neither could outright outmatch the other. During the anvil lift, each contestant held massive anvils aloft for half a local day, an achievement that no other competitors could approach. Every subsequent contest mirrored this stalemate, demonstrating that these two beings were equal in prowess. By the conclusion of the 8th day, no victory had been declared. The elders of Nocturne would then decree that the tie would be broken by the final trial, the hunting of the salamander, the planet's most formidable beast. Each contestant had 1 day to forge a weapon before venturing to track down the largest salamander they could find. Vulkan crafted a massive warhammer, while the stranger produced a keen-edged sword. Together, they ascended Mount Deathfire, which was a creatively named yet massive volcano, said to house the finest fire drakes in all of the land, alongside the largest and most fearsome salamander species on Nocturne. Vulkan located his quarry first, striking it down with a single devastating blow of the hammer. As he carried the carcass back, Mount Deathfire erupted violently. Vulkan was then forced to cling to the edge of a cliff, with one hand holding the salamander tail and with the other struggling for hours against the volcanic fury. Just as his grip began to fail, the stranger appeared, carrying a salamander even larger than his own. Using his heat-resistant hide as a bridge, the stranger rescued Vulkan from certain death. Upon their return, Vulkan was declared the victor, as he still possessed a salamander carcass, while the stranger's price had been sacrificed to save him. Yet Vulkan went on to silence the jubilant crowd, kneeling before the stranger and declaring that any being who valued life over pride was worthy of service. At that moment, the stranger revealed himself. He was the Emperor of Mankind, Vulkan's genetic father. With this revelation, Vulkan assumed his rightful place as Primarch of the 18th Legion, and as guardian of his adopted world, though he would soon depart Nocturne to join the Great Crusade proper. Vulkan's only hesitation concerned the defense of his people, and the Emperor assured him that his duty extended beyond a single world, to countless systems imperiled by alien horrors and the darkest aspects of the galaxy. Nocturne itself, as a homeworld of a Primarch, would be safeguarded by Vulkan's sons, the 18th Legion, carrying his blood and legacy into the stars. You have suffered, I know this. You have come to the abyss and almost surrendered yourselves to it. That changes now. I am father, general, lord, and mentor. I shall teach you, if I can, and pass on the knowledge that I have gained. Honor, self-sacrifice, self-reliance, brotherhood. It is our Promethean creed, and all must adhere to it if we are to prosper. Let this be the first lesson. This is an excerpt from Primarch Vulkan's inaugural address to the survivors of the 18th Legion on Nocturne. The reunification of Vulkan with his legion was neither immediate nor ceremonial. Though rediscovered in 832 M30, the Primarch spent years in the direct tutelage of the Emperor at his side, honing his mind and body in a manner that would be meant for both strategy and legend. During this time, Vulkan's presence was kept from the wider Imperium, though through time other Primarchs became aware of him. As he absorbed the knowledge of war, science, history at an extraordinary pace, he displayed a rare combination of intelligence, wisdom, and compassion. A balance at odds with the catastrophic role all Primarchs were designed to play as generals and breakers of worlds. Vulkan fought alongside the Emperor in countless engagements, as a towering figure clad in emerald scales reminiscent of Terran mythic dragons. He studied the war forges of Mars, apprenticed under his brother Primarch Varus Manus, and mastered weapons and siegecraft, preparing for the day he would take command of his own legion. When that day arrived, Vulkan found the 18th Legion in dire straits. Under Lord Commander Cassian Vogue, the Dragon Warriors were engaged in a desperate rearguard defense of a cluster of human colonies near the Taurus division, confronted by wave after wave of marauding orcs. With the bulk of the Legions Astartes deployed on the eastern fringes or engaged against rangdang incursions in the Halo Stars, the 18th Legion was the only legion positioned to respond. Over the course of nearly a standard year, the Legion, numbering roughly 19,000 Space Marines, conducted a series of grueling raids against over 1 million Orc raiders, dispersed across hundreds of makeshift void ships, rock asteroids, and numerous space hulks. Their steadfast defenses allowed for the evacuation of 3 entire planetary populations to the relative safety of the Taurus system. Though at a tremendous cost, Commander Vogue was grievously wounded, and the remaining 18th became effectively trapped on the death world of Anthem, a planetary lightning rod drawing the Orcs into repeated confrontations. Aid from other legions would have been difficult, and indeed the 18th Legion sought none, determined to bleed the Marauders' strength to protect countless human lives, even at the cost of their own. Vulkan, however, refused to allow their struggle to continue without intervention. When he arrived, he did so with authority and force, accompanied by roughly 3,000 new initiates, the first raised from the men of Nocturne, as well as a fleet of warships and siege engines, alongside weapons crafted to his exacting designs and specifications. Vulkan struck like a storm incarnate. His forces shattered the largest of the space hulks orbiting Anthem, with Vulkan leading from the front, purging the twisted amalgamation of rock and wreckage. Seismic charges were planted deep within the Hulk's cores, ensuring their utter destruction, and the Orc threat to the colonies would thereby be broken. Thus, the 18th Legion was reforged under the guidance of its Primarch, emerging from this crisis tempered in both fire and discipline, with a renewed sense of unity. Vulkan's hand not only saved the colonies, but it also transformed his warriors into a legion capable of enduring the worst the galaxy could offer. Throughout this conflict, the Legion was spurred on by the Primarch's intervention, and they pushed themselves upon the besieging Orcs with a renewed ferocity. Every strike carried the weight of desperation and vengeance, as depleted munitions and exhausted warriors alike pressed forwards, leaving no reserves, no contingencies, and no margin for failure. Caught between the hammer of Vulkan's vanguard and the anvil of their enraged brethren, the Orc horde was shattered, routed, and relentlessly pursued. Flames consumed the fleeing Xenos, leaving nothing but charred wreckage in their wake. When the dust settled, the two halves of the 18th Legion converged upon the dead coral plains of Anthem. The survivors stripped their helms, exhausted from the ordeal, and gazed upon their Nocturnian kin, alongside the towering figure of Vulkan, their Gene-sire, and there was no loss of confusion when seeing the identical otherworldly visages of not only their father, but of their new kin. This was due to the Salamanders raised on Nocturne having been exposed to Nocturne's very particular radiation and already affected by the genetic deviations of Vulkan's gene seed, while the Terran-born original Dragon Warriors had not. The Terran-born warriors instinctively knelt to Vulkan, yet he bade them to rise, declaring that all his sons were equals, and that he required no hollow displays of obedience. Instead, it was he who knelt in solemn reverence for the sacrifices that they had endured, and the countless lives that they had preserved. Seeking out the mortally wounded Lord Commander Cassian Vong, Vulkan formalized the transfer of authority as he presented the fallen commander with the shattered power claw of the Orc warlord who had struck him down. A solemn pact of mutual loyalty would then be struck, as the Legion would fight for its Primarch, but its Primarch would in turn fight for them. With the Legion returned, Vulkan turned his attention to the reforging of its spirits, as he preserved the honor and bravery alongside the sacrifice that had defined the 18th. But in doing so, he also instilled discipline, cohesion, and a shared purpose that had been previously fragmented. First, he gathered the Legion's scattered deployments into a singular, united force, all the while honoring existing commitments, such as the garrison at Greyon Deep, standing sentinel against the possible return of Manticore. With his warriors consolidated, Vulkan returned to Nocturne, where the construction had already begun, of the formidable stronghold on the moon of Prometheus. This fortress, equal in strength to any in the Imperium, would serve as the Legion's headquarters, armory, and training grounds, as Nocturne itself would become a wellspring for the majority of the Legion's fresh recruits, ensuring that Vulkan's own people would shape the Legion's future. Here, Vulkan reorganized and rearmed the 18th Legion, embedding within it a singular purpose and a unified belief system, drawing upon the tutelage he had received alongside the Emperor, which was the knowledge of the Imperial war machine and the deeply ingrained martial and mystical traditions of Nocturne. He instilled culture, honor, resilience, and loyalty into the Legion. In a display of both wisdom and respect, Vulkan retained the positions of the experienced Terran veterans. Their accomplishments, both monumental and understated, were formally recognized. The 18th Legion's heraldry was preserved and incorporated into its new design, honoring its past while pointing towards a renewed future. At the pinnacle of this transformation stood the Power Guard, his elite Praetorian, chosen from the Legion's finest, as they would serve as both Vulkan's personal honor guard and as exemplars of the values and standards that would define the 18th Legion under his new leadership. Through these acts, Vulkan did not merely restore the Legion, he reforged it, tempering it in the fires of combat, discipline, and unity. The 18th Legion emerged from Anthem, and from the shadow of near annihilation it was reborn, ready to endure the rigors of the Great Crusade and countless trials to come. For the fallen First Legion Master of the 18th Legion, Cassian V, Vulkan wrought a tribute of unparalleled craftsmanship. With his own hands, he constructed a unique dreadnought sarcophagus known as the Iron Dragon that would house Vogs in eternal vigilance, serving as the castellan and protector of Prometheus and symbolically safeguarding the Legion itself. The reformed 18th Legion would henceforth bear a name drawn from the greatest predators of Nocturne, the mighty Salamanders, ancient creatures of fire and steel like hides, whose blood burned and whose loyalty to kin was absolute. Vulkan's choice carried a deliberate layered significance. The Noctarian Salamanders were revered by the planet's people for their raw power, fierce protectiveness, and their unyielding devotion to their offspring, the reflection of the values Vulkan sought to instill within his Legion. From the skull of one such colossal beast, Kensere, bleached to a ghostly white, he fashioned the shoulder guard of his own armor, and from that emblem the Legion would derive its new identity. The Salamanders emerged from Nocturne in full force some standard years later, and the Legion itself quickly established a reputation at the vanguard of the Great Crusade. Their campaigns swept across alien domains, bringing lost worlds into Imperial compliance and consolidating the fledgling Imperium, much like their significantly larger kin. Though they never matched the raw numerical strength of the Dark Angels or the Iron Warriors, even dwarfed by the Blood Angels, the Salamanders' power, discipline, and battlefield efficacy became the measure of their enduring excellence. Tempered in fire and battle, the Legion retained the courage and indomitable spirit which Vulkan himself had been famed for. Yet those trials were now tempered with wisdom, stoicism, and calculated precision. No longer prone to impulsive aggression, the Salamanders struck with measured fury. When their wrath was finally unleashed, it struck with an inexorably and terrifying force, equivalent to that of Nocturne's volcanoes. Vulkan's vision preserved his genetic legacy, recognizing his son's potential to craft a legion both mighty and honorable. Guided by his tutelage, the Salamanders learned discipline, patience, mastering a balance between instinct and judgment, as each warrior bore his oaths of moment branded onto their flesh before battle, as a solemn reminder that measured action saved countless lives and tempered the ferocity of the Legion with prudence. It is said that amongst contemporaries and recorded records of the Great Crusade, that the Salamanders became a legion defined by their deliberate mastery of war. Their deeds were neither reckless nor hasty, yet when unleashed, they embodied the full unyielding power of their namesake, fire-born, steadfast, and eternal. During the Great Crusade, the newly reforged Salamanders Legion would be assigned to the 154th Expeditionary Fleet, and their strength bolstered by the Imperial Army regiments drawn from Parthia, another perilous death world. Together, they carried the banners of the Emperor to 100 human-settled worlds, bringing them quickly into Imperial compliance through a combination of strategic mastery and overwhelming force. Amongst these campaigns, the operation designated as 154-4 on the planet known to its inhabitants, Isstvan, as mentioned above, would stand as one of the most remarkable and instructive episodes in the Great Crusade, as the task fell on the 18th Legion, led personally by their Primarch Vulkan, and reinforced by the Iron Hands alongside the Death Guard under their own respective Primarch. Isstvan had been largely underdeveloped and inhospitable, yet this human settlement possessed a mineral wealth that made it strategically valuable to the Imperium. Resistance came swiftly and unexpectedly, as the planet was garrisoned by a group of craft world Eldari, whose forces included a large amount of seers, warlocks, and other formidable combat psychers. Such opponents might have been enough to stall or repel a singular legion, yet 3 fully mobilized legions descended upon the world with a resoluteness unmatched. A complication, however, would arise in reaction to the semi-feral primitive human tribes, who appeared not to welcome them as liberators, and in some cases even showed their sympathy towards the Eldari, an observation that puzzled Imperial historians and commanders alike. Despite these anomalies, the Salamanders and their allies overcame the Asciani defenses with the efficiency expected of Astartes, yet this victory revealed deeper layers of intrigue. The Eldari had been defending a network of psychic nodes, which were feeding into a massive arch, the very locus of their climactic battle between the humans and the Xenos. The Astartes had been guided to the Ark's location by a mysterious remembrancer who had been attached to Vulkan's forces, with whom the Primarch had shared an unnerving dialogue just prior to the assault. When the slaughter concluded, Vulkan observed the remembrancer loitering by the arch before vanishing without explanation. Intrigued and cautious, Vulkan descended with his power guard at his side into the subterranean chambers beneath the Ark. Entering through the portal at its base, there he discovered a crude warding ceremony conducted by the planet's primitive human population, as her priests were preparing the sacrifice of an ancient Drukhari witch. It was at that moment that the truth became clear. The Arch was in fact a webway portal, though none of the Imperials, including Vulkan, understood the significance of this at the time. Vulkan would quickly recognize it from his Noctarian youth, recalling the raids from the Drukhari who had used similar gates to strike at his homeworld. The Eldari, through their victory over their dark cousins, had not only claimed control of the portal, but also liberated Isstvan's human population from centuries of torment at the hands of the Drukhari. To the natives, the Ascianis had been saviors, yet terror gripped the humans at the Imperium's victory, believing that the return of their oppressors had been imminent. The Remembrancer, whose presence had directed Vulkan to this revelation, had vanished from the face of the world. But in truth, the figure had been none other than the Emperor of Mankind in disguise, orchestrating a mission with a deep foresight and interest that only the Emperor could command, ensuring that the full resources of the Imperium were committed to the world's compliance. In the wake of the conquest of Isstvan, Primarch Vulkan issued a decisive judgment upon the world and its irredeemably Xenos-corrupted population. The fires of Exterminatus would be unleashed, purging the planet of all life and ensuring that no trace of alien contamination remained. In the aftermath, the world was now scorched and terraformed to be Nocturne-like. And then it would be renamed to Caldera, a blank slate upon which human colonists could be settled, and whose rich mineral deposits would now serve the Imperium's needs. The Isstvan campaign, however, was but a prelude to the further trials of command and conscience. Soon thereafter, Vulkan and the Salamanders Legion participated in a joint Imperial compliance operation on the world of Kahartan, designated as 154-6. This operation brought them alongside the forces of Primarch Conrad Kurz and his vile Night Lords Legion, as well as Mechanicum Legio Ignis Titans and several Imperial Army regiments. The Katahan campaign became not only a proving ground of strategy and force, but of martial discipline. Vulkan, ever guided by his deep respect for human life, witnessed the Night Lord's methods and was incensed. In one particularly harrowing incident, Kurz's forces slaughtered the inhabitants of an entire city, not for military necessity, but to instill terror within the general population. The act stood in stark contrast to Vulkan's beliefs that war, while brutal, must never abandon honor or humanity. A confrontation between the two Primarchs quickly ensued, which would lend itself to the great animosity that Kurz would later hold for Vulkan. But to further understand this, we must dive in much deeper into the compliance of 154-6, the campaign on Krasshand. Shortly after the decisive conclusion of the Isstvan campaign, Primarch Vulkan and his Salamanders Legion were dispatched to a new Imperial compliance operation on the world of Krasshand, designated as 154-6. This campaign brought them into an uneasy alliance with Primarch Conrad Kurz and his Night Lords, alongside the Mechanicum of Legio Ignis Titans and multiple regiments of Night Lords aligned Imperial Army. The world proved itself to be a decisive training ground of not just conflict, but a linchpin in conflict between strategy and firepower, alongside moral conviction. Vulkan, steadfast in his devotion to the preservation of human life and the principles of honor in war, was shocked by the conduct of the Night Lords and his brother. In the particularly aforementioned notorious incident, Kurz's forces were commanded to slaughter all the inhabitants of a city, not in pursuit of strategic gain, not even out of vengeance, but to instill terror and submission into the remaining populace. Such brutality violated every principle that Primarch Vulkan held as paramount. This led him to confronting Kurz directly. Vulkan, enraged and in disbelief, engaged in a brief yet intense duel. As the two clashed, the transhuman demigods reflected upon their stark, divergent philosophies. Though neither emerged physically defeated, the encounter deepened the ideological chasm between the two brothers. Upon the conclusion of the campaign, Vulkan formally reported the Night Lord's actions to the War Master Horus, and to his brother Rogal Dorn of the Imperial Fists, documented what he deemed as abhorrent transgressions against the Emperor's will. The events on Karhast would plant the seeds of a long-standing animosity between Vulkan and Kurz, and create a rift that would only widen as the Great Crusade pressed onwards, especially since Conrad Kurz found out that his brother had ratted him out. These events, while seemingly contained to a single world, would echo throughout time, later influencing not only Vulkan's decisions and strategic implementations of forces during the tragic and fateful battles at Isstvan V, where honor and loyalty, alongside the fate of the Salamanders, would all be tested well beyond the comprehensions of any mortal man. The Salamanders' role during the Horus Heresy to this day remains only a partly documented affair. What is certain, however, is that the Legion itself, alongside the Iron Hands and the Revenant Guard, formed the spearhead of the Loyalist assault at the faithful drop site massacre of Isstvan V. Following the revelation of War Master Horus Lupercal's treachery and the near total destruction of the Loyalist forces at Isstvan III by the traitorous Sons of Horus, Emperor's Children, World Eaters, and Death Guard, the Emperor ordered a counterstrike, as 7 supposedly Loyalist legions were dispatched to bring Horus to heel. Yet, unbeknownst to the planners, 4 of these reinforcements, those being the Alpha Legion, the Night Lords, the Iron Warriors, and the Word Bearers, had secretly pledged themselves to the ruinous powers and were aligned with Horus, lying in wait for the perfect time to betray their brothers at the most critical and opportune moment. The first wave was led under the supreme command of Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands, which consisted of the Iron Hands, the Raven Guard, and the Salamanders, as they secured the drop site at an enormous cost, demonstrating both discipline and valor in the face of overwhelming odds. At this moment, Horus would feign retreat, and in doing so, he lured Manus into an overextension. Against the direct counsel of both Corvus Corax and Vulkan, Manus pursued the withdrawing traitor forces, only to be confronted by his brother Fulgrim. As the duel of the Primarchs raged, the Raven Guard and the Salamanders withdrew to temporarily regroup, anticipating the advance and aid of the second wave. It was at this critical juncture that the treachery of the second wave was revealed. The Night Lords, Alpha Legion, and Iron Warriors alongside with the Wordbearers struck without warning and cut down loyalists without mercy. Simultaneously, the first wave of traitor legions regrouped, trapping the loyalist forces in a devastating pincer assault. The Iron Hands were all but obliterated as veteran Morlock Terminators fell, and Primarch Ferrus Manus was quickly and unceremoniously beheaded by Fulgrim. The Salamanders and the Raven Guard, though desperate to aid their fallen allies, were forced to break out of the position with only a fraction of their full numbers. Thunderhawk and Stormbird gunships lifted off, carrying survivors, but far fewer than had initially been calculated during the descent to the surface. Corvus Corax of the Raven Guard was also gravely wounded during the scuffle. Vulkan and his Salamanders began the painstaking work of rebuilding from here, preserving what remained of their strength and the Legion's spirit, ensuring that the Salamanders would rise again from the ashes of betrayal and treachery. To go into further detail, the assault went as follows. Seconds after the first dropship pierced the thick and turbulent cloud layer above the Ulgurl Depression, the ground erupted in a symphony of death, as batteries of emplaced guns disgorged torrents upon torrents of fire, cutting through the descending transports with an unimaginable precision. As flak rained down like molten rain, shredding both wings and hulls, as detonating munitions shredded through loyalist forces midair, scattering their deadly contents not only across the sky but across the battlefield proper. Yet amidst this maelstrom, the Loyalists pressed on. When the first wave of Loyalist forces finally struck the planet's surface, more than 40,000 legionaries poured out into the scorched black sand of the world. Of the initial deployment, only 15 Salamanders gunships and 11 drop pods were lost. This was more of a testament to the Salamanders' mastery over up-arming technology than anything else. The assault itself was structured with precision, almost surgical in its intent. The Salamanders struck the left flank, while the Raven Guard went to the right, and Ferrus Manus alongside his massed Morlock Terminator cadre would hold the center. Black sand, cratered and uneven from the bombardment, made the movement uncertain along with unsteady, as waves upon waves of Astartes emerged from the holds of the dropship and the dissipating fire clouds of incoming drop pods. Several faltered, slipping upon the treacherous terrain and being brought low by heavy encamped fire. Even as they securely landed, the enemy tore into them as the ranks advanced. Hundreds of the first legionaries to land fell long before a beachhead was secured or any defensive position established. Bolter fire met bolter fire in an unending cascade of flame and percussive fire, punctuated by the staccato roar of thousands upon thousands of discharging weapons. Missile volleys whined overhead, leaving stark white contrails in their wake, while earthworks erupted in searing explosions, throwing dirt and armored warriors up into the air. Las bolts streaked across the sky, searing tanks and dreadnoughts alike, only to meet a relentless counterassault. Flamers smoked the skies with choking heat and the stench of incinerated human flesh, as more esoteric weapons pulsed and shrieked. It was a cacophony of utter annihilation, yet it sounded like a symphony of death to the traitors, one which had only begun to sing its first verse. Along the right flank, a green tide of the Salamanders Legion surged forth. Legionaries spilled from their transports, forming into disciplined, purposeful battalions. The black sands obscured beneath their feet as they advanced with both banners and vexillas snapping in the wind. attempting to impose order in this chaotic wave. At the forefront strode Vulkan as a colossal figure armored in emerald wrath, flanked by his elite fire drakes. Behind them, Terminators emerged in two formidable battalions, forming veritable metal spearheads, yet the secondary might of their contemptor dreadnoughts and the recently re-established Saturnine pattern dreadnoughts aided in the Salamanders' advance. These towering dreadnoughts, living relics of war, stomped across the battlefield, with graviton guns, autocannons, and a litany of esoteric, harshly remembered weapons, tore defenses apart. However, their advance was slow, yet unending, as attack horns blared and were amplified further still through vox emitters, their discordant notes simulating cries of ancient drakes, magnifying the terror across the enemy ranks. Here the Salamanders moved not as soldiers, but as an unyielding tide of green, each step a drumbeat, a deadly march towards Horus's rebels, as the battlefield became an extension of their will, and the black sands, now swallowed in green, smoke and fire, waved as the first verse of the Dropsite Massacre played out in terrifying clarity. The Loyalists would not know what was to come next. As this was happening, Spartan assault tanks, Predator's Infernuses, and Vindicator tanks disgorged themselves from the Thunderhawk transports, as the Salamander's full armored might poured into the Old Girl Depression. Tracks ground the blackened sand into more fine dust as they advanced, as a veritable rolling bulwark made its way forward, anchoring the drop site. These three spearheads drove directly towards the fortress, squatting atop Urgal's hills, two walls of black and one of green, all converged at the heart of the traitor line. In seconds, the shifting sands vitrified under the searing heat of tens of thousands of bolters, flamers, melta-weapons, and volkite being fired upon the world, as the sand cracked under the pressure due to becoming molten glass. Vulkan, still at the forefront, ordered his Gene Sons to seize the ridge, gaining a tactical advantage over their entrenched foes, as shells pranged and ricocheted off his emerald carapace. Yet he pressed forward, the Power Guard straining to keep up pace with their towering Primarch. Behind them, the Pyroclasts advanced methodically, laying down sheets of burning promethium upon both their flanks, as they moved in a rolling tide of flame meant to shepherd the enemy into submission. Even the Terminator armored fire drakes, massive and dauntless, struggled to match the Primarch's pace. Their commander, First Captain Numenon, noted the risk of falling behind, isolated from Vulkan's spearhead. To bolster the assault, the 15th Reconnaissance Company assumed a leading position alongside the Power Guard, nimble enough to maintain the charge where bulkier fire drakes and pyroclasts could not. The outermost trench of the Death Guard's defensive network now loomed ahead, fire-blackened and jagged. Hunkered within, the Death Guard Legion, once comrades, now faced the Salamanders as enemies. Trench gunners unleashed a torrent of bolter fire, countering the advancing green tide. Vulkan shrugged aside splintering rounds, which ricocheted off his nearly impervious armor as he continued pressing forth, unyielding, slaying uncountable numbers of his brother's Gene Sons. Across the Ogrel Depression, the battle raged on, without nary a pause, as company-sized engagements erupted alongside smaller squads and lone duels. Legions locked in mortal combat with no overarching order, only a singular purpose: annihilate the enemy. While the bulk of the Loyalist forces moved to engage Horus's fortress, a few stubborn squads held the breach, crushing any enemy forces that dared approach. As the 15th Company pressed against the retreating Death Guard, a dirty yet suffocating cloud descended from the slopes. A chemical miasma was unleashed, thick and fast. It filled the trench work with a deadly reach that was nigh inevitable. The Death Guard, anticipating the arrival of the Salamanders, had adjusted the respirators in preparation. These were no mere weapons of flesh and steel unleashed upon the legions. It was a slow and agonizing instrument, indiscriminate in its destruction, a leveler of both mortal and transhuman alike. From veteran champions to the lowest conscripts, none could escape its horrific toll. The battlefield became a veritable crucible, where fire, smoke, and ash mixed with the hiss of this toxic gas. Sand crackled beneath the weight of armored titans as bolter fire stitched across the air with a wide spark. As the raw methodical force of Vulkan's Legion continued forward, even with this, shaping the first desperate wave of what would be remembered in Imperial history as the Dropsite Massacre. Now the 15th Reconnaissance Company seemed to suffer grievously under the onslaught of the Death Guard's chemical assault, as more than 100 warriors almost instantly collapsed, choking, coughing up blood, as many had chosen to forego helmets, favoring the freedom needed for their stealth-styled operation. And now they paid the price, as their skin blistered and sloughed off under the virulent acids, with their eyes swelling shut, their organs infected with pus, and the choking clouds of noxious gas causing vast waves of convulsive vomiting. What remained of these Astartes were little more than half-armored carcasses. Dozens of them were then shredded by the resurgent Death Guard forces, exploiting the confusion and hacking alongside shooting through their defenseless, disoriented foes. The numerically superior Death Guard then proceeded to encircle the remnants of the Salamanders, intent on fully annihilating them. However, it was Vulkan who intervened, as he then cut a swath through the overlapping warriors, as First Captain Numenon, alongside the Pyre Guard, soon would move ahead to reinforce him, and a dense chaotic melee erupted. Around them, the battlefield roared in an intense brouhaha, with a symphony of fire, steel, and blood-soaked mist clattering around them. Then a new horror arrived, a ruddy smog carried by a crosswind from the east, which swept across the depression, heralding the advance of the 12th Legion, the World Eaters. Ash from thousands of fires darkened the skies, descending upon the combatants. From the haze emerged the rampagers, clad in ritualized gladiatorial gear, wielding the legendary cadre weapons, which were a grim echo of Angron's enslavement. Only 3 squads, no more than 30 warriors had been unleashed, yet they charged forward with a ferocity of hundreds upon hundreds, as bolter fire and shrapnel did little to deter them. There was something truly unnatural in their frenzy. Even in their earliest incarnations as the Warhounds, the 12th Legion had been feared as some of the fiercest close-quarter combatants, but now reborn under Angron's brutal guidance and the boon of the Butcher's nails, the Legion seemed possessed by rage beyond natural predilection, ignoring pain and grievous wounds. Within the Salamanders' ranks, whispers circulated of the devices implanted in Angron's skull by his captors, and the simulacra that now had inflamed his son's temperament. Yet it was at this very moment that the reality of it set in. Amidst the chaos elsewhere on the slopes, the Salamander's fire drakes clashed with Angron's personal bodyguard, the Devourers, and despite their greater numbers, they became locked in a stalemate. For the first time, the Lord of the Red Sands came close to his honor guard, in a prelude to the confrontations of the Primarchs that would follow throughout the heresy. Then came the challenge. Angron bellowed in his guttural native tongue, calling out the name of his brother Primarch, Vulkan. As the blood smeared and partially obscured by the simmering smoke, the Red Angel advanced. Switching to High Gothic, his voice thundered across the Olgal depression, as a sound which echoed as if it were a collapsing city. Vulkan, I name you High Rider. With a motorized power axe roaring in his hands, Angron descended upon his brother, the blade hunting for blood, as he was a herald of unparalleled violence, one which would define the very existence of the tragedy of the Dropsite Massacre, as he tore in and through everything that was ahead of him with a systematic aggression that was unparalleled. Further down the scarred slope, Vulkan tightened his grip on the haft of his immense warhammer, known as Dawnbringer, preparing to meet the challenge issued by his brother Angron. Yet before the Primarchs could collide in direct combat, fate or perhaps treachery intervened, An advancing salvo of traitor guns encampments launched a missile into the sky, only for it to descend violently into the slope between the two demigods. The resulting inferno erupted in a vast firestorm, sweeping outwards in turbulent waves, scorching the lower slopes in the heat of flame. At the epicenter of this destruction, it was absolute chaos. Fire drakes caught in the blast were automatically immolated, as their Terminator armor was reduced to molten metal. Yet Vulkan, wreathed in flames, stepped forward unscathed, impervious to the conflagration that had befallen him. The surviving fire drakes rallied to his side, trudging over their fallen whenever necessary, their resolve unbroken, the very attrition inflicted by the relentlessness of the World Eaters ignored. Vulkan understood that this battle demanded every ounce of their endurance, and he allowed himself a fleeting relief when the distant sounds of the arrival of supposed loyalist reinforcements fell, as hundreds of landers and drop pods crowded the smoke-choked sky. Emblazoned with the sigils of the Alpha Legion, the Iron Warriors, the Word Bearers, and the Night Lords, Vulkan watched impassively as the reinforcements touched down, their legionaries forming ranks alongside the edges of the Old Girl Depression. At this time, Angron was no longer anywhere to be seen, as the firestorm had forced him back. With the arrival of 4 additional legions, the Lord of the Red Sands had prudently ordered a retreat. Both the Raven Guard and the Salamanders withdrew towards the drop site, ceding the field to the newly arrived Loyalist forces. Vulkan, alongside his brother Corvus Corax, attempted to persuade the fiery-tempered Ferrus Manus to do the same. Yet the Gorgon was inconsolable. Scenting the blood in the air, he pressed the attack against the retreating traitors, intending to slay his once favored brother Fulgrim. Unknown to the Loyalists, the drop site had been secretly reinforced by 4 traitor legions, those that were designated to form the second wave of the Imperial assault, while Horus's retreating forces, seeming ragged and disorganized, were in fact anything but, as armored columns rumbled steadily down the slopes and the scorched trenches. Legionaries filed in vast, orderly hosts. Company banners still held aloft. The wounded and the fallen, retrieved by their surviving brethren, were carried and dragged in a steadfast movement, as a black and green tide of war receded, leaving behind a disoriented and desolated battlefield. This was an exodus, one that would be met with an unimaginable betrayal. On the northernmost face of the Urgal Depression, a new tide of devastation awaited the Loyalist forces, poised to sweep away all who stood in their path. Across from the Salamanders' makeshift ledge of drop ships, the Iron Warriors had established their own positions, clad in steel gray and black with yellow chevrons. They presented an intimidating yet grim facade, their landing craft having been welded into barricades, armored bastions of unfeeling, unflinching metal, while great cannons rose from behind them, their barrels aimed skywards. All the while, a line of battle tanks bearing the metallic skull emblems formed a deadly shield at the very forefront, and thousands upon thousands of Iron Warriors stood motionless, almost as if they were automata, their weapons held across their bodies, waiting for their next orders. No legionary of the Salamanders stood idle, yet the Iron Warriors made no response or hail or challenge. Only the banners stirred in the wind, whispering a latent threat of their intent. Where Vulkan advanced towards Peterabo, the veritable Lord of Iron, their gazes finally met, as the Lord of Drakes noticed at that very instant that they had been betrayed. More than 10,000 arrayed guns erupted in a treacherous fury. Their weapons, those of supposed allies, cut down the Salamanders' ranks, thinning the Loyalists between the hammer of Horus and the anvil of the fortified northern drop site. Rage and the bitter sting of betrayal propelled Vulkan up the slope. The Power Guard labored to keep pace, driven by the Primarchs' indomitable will. All the while the battle companies followed, captains roaring as the tide of green warriors surged uphill, determined to punish the sons of Peterabo. The crossfire was merciless, as hundreds of Salamanders fell in the first seconds of this deceit. Yet their tenacity, one of the many virtues of the Legion, propelled them onwards. Only as the majority crested the first ridge did the full scope of the traitors' treachery reveal itself. A secondary blinding arc of fire streaked across the skies as rockets screamed in parabolic arcs before descending onto the midst of the Salamanders' charge. The Iron Warriors' orbital fleet also unleashed tactical nuclear strikes, and the Orgarl Hills were torn asunder in a titanic explosion. Craters gorged the black sands as if created by some mythic beasts having descended upon the world, hurling legionaries into the sky as if their suits of armor were empty. Tanks were flipped and ignited, their metal hulls ripped apart, while those spared the initial blast were shredded in a storm of shrapnel. All the while, super heavy tanks collapsed as if they were mere tin cans. Their crewmen boiled alive as the legionaries were reduced to ash in the furnace of betrayal. Only the far advanced Power Guard, slightly ahead of the main body, avoided the full brunt of the blast, as the secondary nuclear blasts generated a subsequent electromagnetic pulse, severing Vox communications entirely. Tactical cohesion would then evaporate. In a catastrophic strike, the Lord of Iron had decapitated the Salamanders Legion and thrown its convulsing body into chaos. Retreat became the only viable option. Survivors fled the drop site, desperate to board upon any ship. It was not a rout in the conventional sense, as few could stand to watch such overwhelming force, but both Vulkan and Horus Corax would survive. Eyewitness accounts conflict. Some reports state that Vulkan was gravely injured, then dragged aboard a Thunderhawk gunship by 3 Power Guard and returned to Nocturne. But the reality of the Primarchs' fate was a far darker affair, and more uncertain than even these harrowing accounts suggest. It seems that against all odds, Vulkan survived, being at the epicenter of the nuclear inferno unleashed by the Iron Warriors' orbital strike, a firestorm that had annihilated hundreds upon hundreds of his gene sons almost instantly. Yet his survival offered no immediate respite, as he was now encircled by numbers of traitor legionaries, drawn from the Night Lords and the Iron Warriors. The Primarch of the Salamanders now stood alone. Though he fought with an unmatched ferocity, and every one of his swings with his mighty weapon tucked down scores of traitors Astartes, every clash against the traitors only delayed the inevitable, and eventually the sheer tide of hostile warriors overcame him as he was struck, stabbed, bludgeoned, and beat into unconsciousness. It was then that Conrad Kurz, the Night Lord's twisted and pathetic Primarch, would come to claim him. As he had always been teetering on the brink of madness, Kurz decided to take possession of Vulkan as one would a prize, intending to revel and self-adulate in the torment that he would do upon his sibling. When Vulkan awoke, he found himself shackled in massive chains aboard the Ghoul Hulk of the Night Lord's Legion, far from the heat of battle, yet plunged into a far crueler war. For months on end, the Night Hunter sought to crush him, body and mind alike, employing every conceivable method of torture. Yet each time he struck, Vulkan's very form regenerated. This was a revelation that would drive Kurz to unending fury, as he believed himself to have been cursed with the gift of foresight, while he was now facing a brother that had been revealed as a perpetual, a being capable of continuous cellular regeneration, effectively being an immortal, much like the Emperor himself. Each attempt on his life, beheading, throat-ripping, improvised tools being inserted into his body in varying degrees, impalement, disembowelment, evisceration, mass Volterfire, even exposure to the vacuums of space and dips in acid, all were rendered futile attempts by this nigh unnatural gift. Every failed execution inflamed Kurz's obsession further and further still, as the Night Hunter sought to force Vulkan to admit that he was a monster akin to himself, as the pathetic excuse of a Primarch sought validation for his own mistakes, rather than accepting that it was he who was wrong. Sorcery too failed, as Davenite sorcerer priests, empowered by the ruinous powers, would attempt to assault his mind with illusionary trails, endless scenarios upon where he failed noble tasks, resulting in the deaths of countless innocents. Yet the Primarch's resolve remained unplacable, unbroken even, as his spirit had been tempered by years upon years of loyalty and hardship. At last, the cowardly Kurz had devised a final challenge, a duel of cunning and endurance, as he offered Vulkan a chance to reclaim his freedom and his prized weapon, the legendary Dawnbringer, but only through a battle within a labyrinth of unfathomable complexity, crafted by Beterabo, the Lord of Iron, master of siegecraft and design. This prison was a near-perfect imitation of the Primarch's own Cavera Ferrum, a construct of impossible geometry where its featureless walls and twisting corridors confounded all attempts at mental mapping, defying even the most disciplined of minds. Yet Vulkan, against all odds and probability, accomplished the impossible, navigating the maze with inexhaustible patience. When he reached the heart and seized Dawnbringer, where courage would tell him that he had disabled the teleporter beacon within the hammer, so he was trapped. But Vulkan would then remind him, it's not just a teleporter. Dawnbringer is also a hammer, to which he brought the hammer, to which he smote his brother. However, courage would in fact survive due to his Primarch physiology. Through his technical expertise, Vulkan reactivated the teleport homer hidden within the hammer, transporting himself across the galaxy and reappearing across the upper atmosphere above Macragge, the homeworld of the Ultramarines, as he plummeted from a near impossible height, in which doing so caused him to be seared by atmospheric friction. Even as consciousness faded, Vulkan's mind was calm, confident in the knowing that his perpetual form would restore him, and that he would soon be in the care of his Ultramarine kin. Though the galaxy raged with betrayal and war, the Salamanders' Primarch endured, despite his pathetic brother's best attempts at breaking him. Still unaware of the full horrors that had unfolded upon Isstvan V, Lord Chaplain Namus Raitan would dispatch Chaplain Lieutenant Xiphus Jur in 570-007 M31, along with a contingent of 30 fire drakes aboard the Ebon Drake. Their mission was to ascertain the fate of the Salamander's missing forces and, if possible, locate their Primarch. When the vessel arrived over the blackened sands of Isstvan V, the scene that greeted them was one of desolation. Amidst the charred trenches and crater plains, the battered shells of the Dragon Revenant lay strewn across the battlefield. Though heavily damaged and barely functional, the machine, designed and built by Vulkan, this legendary venerable dreadnought, refused to surrender to a final death. Cassian Dracos, known amongst his brothers as the Twice Dead and the Avatar of the Sacred Flames, had emerged from the blood-soaked blackened sands of Isstvan V, irrevocably altered. His survival was no simple miracle. His prolonged exposure to the planet's infernal devastation had left him with an unpredictable temperament and an unnerving ability to command the creations of the machine god and all that were bound to them. He had functionally developed technokinesis. His presence aboard the Ebon Drake reinvigorized the unbelievably demoralized crew, who now pressed their search for Vulkan with a renewed sense of determination, convinced, at least via the visual reports provided to them by the Dreadnought, that their Primarch yet lived. Later, in 007 M31, the third siege of Menza would occur, as the saga of the Shattered Legions continued as Cassian Dracos, now bearing the mantle of Cassian Vogan, and the crew of the Ebon Drake journeyed to the beleaguered forge world of Meza, deep within Segmentum Obscurus. Here, the remnants of the Salamanders joined the planet's defenders against a coordinated assault from the 114th Grand Battalion of the Iron Warriors and the 78th chapter of the Alpha Legions, commanded by Consul Legatus Autun Sakor. With the blessings of the Norn Queens, the venerable regents of Meza, Vorgan's dreadnought shell, forged by Vulkan himself, was sanctified as a living symbol of the machine god's favor, and the enduring spirit of the Salamanders allowed them to heavily upgrade the machine, despite it going against all restrictions of the Mechanicum's own sacred oaths. Vong struck with a precision and authority unknown to those of Chaos, confronting Narik Drangur, the Iron Warrior's commanding officer. Through displays of martial prowess and strategic acumen, Vorung revealed the betrayal of the Alpha Legion, convincing Dragar to realign his forces with the Loyalists. Together, they drove the Alpha Legion from Menza, preserving the Forge World and striking a small victory for the remnants of the Emperor's loyal sons. The return of Cassian Dracos marked a turning point for the Shattered Legions, as survivors of the Dropsite massacres who had once teetered on the edge of despair now found a renewed sense of purpose. Though challenged by the very crucible and melting pot which was Isstvan V, Dracos' presence would prove to be a great boon, but not greater than his new technomantic abilities, aiding the Salamanders in their struggle to reclaim both their honor and the scattered remains of their shattered brotherhood. Later, in 007 M31, the charred remains of Vulkan were recovered by the Ultramarines, who initially mistook the immense corpse for a grotesque statue, a relic of a war frozen in unholy stasis. In the days that followed, however, the impossible became a reality. The Primarch's body began to regenerate, slowly at first, then with accelerating vigor. Life returned to Vulkan in full, leaving the Ultramarines' apothecaries utterly dumbfounded. Word of the phenomenon reached the ears of Reboot Guilliman, who quickly arrived at the Apothecarian only to find Vulkan in a state of mental instability, violent, incoherent, and deeply tormented. The psychological fracture stemmed from the perverse bond formed with his brother Primarch Conrad Kurz due to his immense cruelty aboard the Nightfall, compounded with surviving a nuclear explosion and then burning up, falling from orbit. Vulkan's instinctive reaction was heightened further still by the Primarch's almost psychic awareness of Kurz's presence lingering somewhere on Macragge itself. At the same time, the Dark Angel Legion had arrived in the 500 worlds of Ultramar, drawn by the empathic signals of an alien artifact known as the Pharos, a stellar beacon that mirrored the functions of the Astronomicon. Following the collapse of the Night Lord's Legion during the Thramas Crusade, Kurz had executed a desperate gamble, committing himself to a boarding action of the Dark Angel's flagship, the Invincible Reason. Though most of his warriors would perish or were captured, Kurz escaped, ultimately stealing a drop pod to descend upon Macragge's surface, spreading both terror and chaos with unremitted horror. Vulkan, breaking free of his bonds, seized Guilliman's private armory and set forth in pursuit of the Night Hunter. The two Primarchs clashed in a duel of unimaginable scale, Vulkan levering his newly discovered regenerative abilities to recover from injuries at an exponential rate. The duel was temporarily halted by John Grammaticus, a perpetual tasked by the shadowy Xenos coalition known as the Cabal, to eliminate Vulkan preemptively with Fuglerite, a petrified bolt of the Emperor's psychic power. Grammaticus was meant to deliver the weapon to Kurz, who would use it to strip Vulkan of his immortality. Yet before the act could be carried out, the Eldar Farseer, Eldrad Earthwain, intervened, convincing Grammaticus to wield the Fuglerite himself. Striking at the heart of Vulkan, Grammaticus caused a psychic explosion that supposedly ended both their lives, neutralizing the perpetual regeneration and restoring Vulkan's mind. Following this, Vulkan's body was retrieved once again, placed it in a stasis capsule, and etched into its surface were the words Unbound Flame. Yet even this was not the conclusion of Vulkan's tale. The surviving shattered legionaries from Isstvan V would eventually be drawn by the Pharos to Macragge, and they would maintain a vigil over Vulkan's stasis casket. Amongst them was First Captain Atreus Numenon, who remained convinced that their Primarch yet lived. Determined to restore Vulkan fully, Numenon undertook an arduous expedition back to Nocturne, intending to immerse Vulkan's body in the purifying fire of Mount Deathfire. The journey itself was fraught with no small amount of peril, as the Salamander's vessel was pursued by a traitor fleet comprised of both Death Guard and Wordbearer's forces, each with their own designs for Vulkan's body. Against impossible odds, the Loyalists navigated through the turbulent ruin storm and reached Nocturne, where they met Lord Captain Nomus Rython, keeper of the Keys of Prometheus, and there a desperate battle ensued between the Loyalist and traitor forces, culminating in the Salamanders' victory. Once victorious, the Salamanders conducted the rites to commit Vulkan's body to the purifying flames of Mount Deathfire, awaiting the miraculous restoration of their Primarch. After a solar week, Numenon's spirit was nearly broken by the long vigil. When the next time of trials approached, he renounced his rank and wandered into the ashen-choked slopes of Mount Deathfire, offering himself as a final sacrifice for the restoration of Vulkan. True to the legend, Vulkan did regenerate once more, yet his resurgence would remain unseen to the wider Imperium until he turned back up on Terra during the last waning days of the siege, where he would use the Eldar webway to find his way to his father's side. There he would eventually confront and, through the Emperor's blessing and aid, slay the demon prince Magnus, who would eventually return. He would also be tasked with holding the keys to a device that had the ability to completely wipe out all existence within Imperium Solar, in order to ensure that even if the traitors somehow defeated the Emperor, it would be a Pyrrhic victory at best. In the aftermath of the Horus Heresy, the galaxy was left in ruins, and the Salamanders' experience during this period remains at least partly shrouded in obscurity due to their numbers being reduced so much that their operational efficiency was essentially naught, leaving records fragmentary at best. And much of what is known is preserved only in the rather guarded archives of the Salamanders Librarius. What is indisputable, however, is the key role that Vulkan played during the time of rebirth, as the Imperium sought to recover and safeguard itself from further internal strife. When Reboot Guilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, and the Imperial Regent authored the Codex Astartes, he intended to prevent another civil war from breaking down the Imperium by then breaking down the might of the Space Marine legions into smaller, more manageable chapters, each limited to no more than 1,000 warriors. Vulkan, alongside Leman Russ of the Space Wolves and Rogel Dorn of the Imperial Fists, initially opposed this measure. To the Primarch of the Salamanders, the Codex's restructuring risked undermining the identity and cohesion of the Legion itself, a legion that had endured the catastrophic losses caused by the Dropsite Massacre. Yet, as with the other Primarchs, Vulkan would eventually relent, prioritizing the stability and unity of the Imperium above personal and organizational pride. The result was a compromise. The Salamanders would remain intact, the only legion explicitly exempt from division. While later foundings may have been produced through the use of the chapter's genetic legacy, there are no extensive records detailing second founding successors being directly sired from the Salamanders. Nevertheless, the similarities in physiological makeup, physical markings, and tactical doctrine of certain chapters, such as the Black Dragons and the Storm Giants, suggest the Salamander's gene seed may have been incorporated alongside traditions indirectly into the creation of other chapters. The stark truth of the exemption comes from the Salamander's immediate inability to produce successors being a consequence of the devastation they had suffered being significantly more than any of the other loyalist legions. As with each of the great settlements of Nocturne being one of the few places that they had drawn recruits from, and the battle on the planet itself devastating those as well, their existence would continue largely unchanged for a significant amount of time by the Codex's division or limitations, allowing them to be one of the legions most closely aligned with their original structure, despite adopting much of the Codex's operational stratagems as time would go on after the heresy. The stark reality following the Horus Heresy is that the Salamanders' immediate inability to produce any successor chapters was a consequence of the unimaginable devastation they had both suffered during the Dropsite Massacre and in the ensuing conflict within their homeworld. Their numbers were simply too reduced and their lineage too weakened for the traditional division of the Legion into multiple chapters. Consequently, Vulkan's initial misgivings about the Codex were set aside by not only his brothers, but by the Imperium at large. And to this day, the Salamanders maintain compliance with the Codex's dictates, preserving the singular chapter structure. However, they do deviate, yet despite the adherence to the Codex's overall structure, the Salamanders continue to honor the organizational traditions of the Legion as it was prior to the Horus Heresy, with 7 warrior houses of the Legion remaining central in the structure of the Salamanders chapter, with each great settlement of Nocturne forming the basis of one of these 7 main companies. That, along with the fact that the chapter maintains a scout company, unique in that it possesses no permanent settlements as instead the aspirants to the chapter reside in the harsh, mountainous terrain of Nocturne, training under the extreme conditions until they are ready to properly join the warrior house as they are reborn as full battle brothers. While each line company slightly exceeds the standard Codex compliant numbers, the Scout Company is notably smaller than almost any of their kin, including that of the Flesh Terrors, which is an achievement in and of itself. Instead, these aspirants are in a company barely half the size of similar companies in other chapters. This is a consequence of both the harsh conditions alongside the sparse population of Nocturne and the Salamander's own rather meticulous training program. Due to this, despite its limitations, this method has provided a slow, steady, and consistent replenishment of warriors, ensuring the chapter endures, tempered by both adversity and communal suffering, meanwhile remaining capable of maintaining its strength for whatever trials the galaxy may send to them. The ultimate fate of the Salamander's Primarch remains one of the most consistently argued about, closely guarded secrets of the Imperium, as it sparks debate across Terran history, from Nocturne all the way to Terra. As following the conclusion of the Horus Heresy, Vulkan's presence continued to shape and form his legion into a greater version of itself. Yet eventually he would vanish from recorded history, leaving behind no declared mission and no witness testimony. Only fragmented evidence hint about his current whereabouts. Some accounts suggest that Vulkan led the Salamanders chapter for as long as 3 millennia, guiding his warriors with characteristic foresight and vigilance, alongside his unshakable, unquestionable compassion. Yet despite the details of his actions during this age, many of the records have been lost or fragmented due to both the hazards of Imperial record keeping and the more vile members of the Imperium potentially seeing the legitimacy of a Primarch such as Vulkan and his legion deviating so much from the ecclesiarchy's stated belief system that they believed he had to be erased as much as possible. Yet the details of his actions remain as echoes. The uncertainty surrounding his later life only deepens his legacy, specifically what he left behind. A carefully crafted corpus known as the Tome of Fire. Within this compendium, Vulkan encoded the location and the purpose of 9 sacred artifacts. Each he willed to the chapter. According to the Tome of Fire, more than 1,000 standard years after the Horus Heresy, Vulkan disappeared with these very relics, and they were strewn across the galaxy as a deliberate trial for the chapter's worthiness. Of the 9, 5 have been recovered by the chapter. Amongst these are the Spear of Vulkan, Karsi's Mantle, the Gauntlet of the Forge, all of which are wielded by the chapter's Forge Father, Vulkan Isstvan. 2 others, the Chalice of Fire and the Eye of Vulkan, remain safeguarded upon Prometheus, Nocturne's moon, within the chapter's Fortress Monastery. The remaining 4, the Engine of Woes, the Obsidian Chariot, Unbound Flame, and the Song of Entropy, have yet to be discovered, their locations shrouded in secrecy. However, there are some who believe that these legendary relics may be in the possession of some of the most dangerous foes of humanity, making the Salamander's quest to retrieve them all that more pressing. The Tome of Fire also declares that only when all 9 artifacts are recovered by the Forge Father will Vulkan deem the Salamanders sufficiently tempered, passing the ultimate test of loyalty, skill, resilience, and nobility. This goes on to state that according to the legend, this event will herald Vulkan's return to lead the chapter in a final war against humanity's foes, fulfilling the prophecies preserved in the most sacred texts of the Salamanders. With the opening of the Great Rift and the onset of the Era Indomitus, the Salamander's duty has never been clearer. In this era of unparalleled hardship for the Imperium, the chapter has borne the brunt of countless campaigns, acting as both a bulwark and a sword for those threatened by the fires of war. These trials have been rather costly for the chapter, in no small part due to the slow pace of recruitment combined with the Salamander's almost pathological commitment to others, placing an immense strain on the chapter itself. yet it is a burden that they accept with nary a complaint. For the sons of Vulkan, these challenges are merely a crucible, one which will be used to yield a more solid form of the steel of their souls. They endure, confident that from the inferno of struggle, they will emerge stronger than ever before, honed by adversity and made ready to meet the day when their Primarch and the full power of the Salamanders returns. And when they return, they believe that they will shape the Imperium's destiny. The centuries following the Horus Heresy proved to be no less perilous for the Salamanders, as they now navigated a galaxy fraught not just with mortal threats, but with ecclesiastical ones as well. Their actions during the Age of Apostasy and the Age of Redemption highlight the Legion's commitment to the protection of civilians, and by that, the Imperium itself, often placing themselves at odds with the more zealous adherents to the Imperial cult. One such example of this would occur during M36. In this conflict, the Salamanders prioritized the safety of innocents over the dictates of the ecclesiarchy, drawing the ire of Arch-Cardinal Brengio, the right hand to the pathetic tyrant Gouge Van Dyer, who declared the Promethean cult as heretical. Brengio marshaled 3 orders of Sisters of Battle alongside a massive, nigh uncountable contingent of ecclesiarchal forces in order to hunt down 5 Salamanders companies on the world of New Folly. Initially, the chapter fought only to defend themselves, but as assault upon assault rained down upon the hive cities of New Folly, they were drawn out into open combat. Fortunately, news of Brengio's assassination by the Inquisition arrived just in time to disperse the pursuing forces before the brouhaha got out of control, sparing the Salamanders from a prolonged conflict with the Imperium itself. Up next would be the fires of Pistios Oressus, occurring in 533 M39, upon the cardinal world of Phasiantos Oressus, which was a linchpin of the Osirian sector and the home of the revered Basilica of Saint Thoth the Intercessor, and it would come under attack from a threat of a massive orc incursion led by Rakaripa. The Salamanders deployed all 7 companies in order to spearhead the planet's defense, combining disciplined militia from the Scalia Progenium with hundreds of thousands of volunteer pilgrims, employing a strategy of intricate defense through depth. The Salamanders would then manipulate the orcs' homicidal rage, forcing them into traps of their own making. In orbit, the chapter's fleet, supported by Battlefleet Ultima, launched a precision strike against the orcs' Death Hulks, while elite squads of Firedrake Terminators conducted teleport raids aboard the Hulks, planting seismic charges and ripping them apart in controlled nuclear-level detonations. On the surface, the Salamanders countered the final orc assault on the main temple city, aided by fanatical redemptionist self-termination squads. Promethean would flood the avenues of the city, as it would then be ignited by the Salamanders. Shortly after this, the Salamanders would strike proper, with Firedrakes ascending from above as the chapter's main force would assault on foot, annihilating the Waaagh in a blazing inferno so large it was visible from orbit. This was a testament to the chapter's tactical mastery and their preference of flame-based assaults. Later in 793 M40, on the hive world of Ulblok, the Dark Eldar would unleash one of their most insidious horrors. A coven of homunculi had released a biotoxin that dissolved human flesh while leaving the Eldar unharmed. Observing this spectacle from atop hive spires through high-powered scrying arrays, the Salamanders, upon learning of this atrocity, dispatched one of their strike cruisers to excise these corrupted regions. Stormraven gunships deployed a rather well-armed siege-breaker cohort to the upper levels of the hives, where the warriors' internal air supplies replaced their standard rebreathers. Even as the toxins ate away at their flesh and the structural integrity of their power armor, the Salamanders fought on. War suits, now empty of living hosts, would continue to move under the fury of their bound machine spirits, culminating in the last 2 operative suits reaching the homunculi layer, expending all their munitions. destroying not only the Dark Eldar warriors, but the twisted scientists who had created this abomination before falling dormant. Through the centuries, the Salamanders have proved their devotion to humanity and their chapter far beyond mere survival, as they have fought on to uphold the nobility of human life, even when confronted by both mortal and inhuman horrors. These are just nary a handful of incidents during both the Age of Apostasy and the Age of Redemption where the Salamanders' greatest features shined through, as their status would be further solidified as the Imperium's bulwark, tempered by fire and tested by blood. In the final centuries of M41, long after Vulkan had vanished, humanity was in the time of ceaseless, relentless conflict. For the Salamanders, it was their unwavering duty to defend humanity with their utmost devotion, and this brought them to the forefront of the Imperium's most dangerous engagements. Deeds during this period illustrate both the perils faced by mankind and the unique roles the Sons of Vulkan played in safeguarding the galaxy. Purging the moons of Yamargi in the time of 754 through 756 M41. This was due to the Edict of the High Lords of Terra, implementing a much more harsh series of operations against suspected gene stealer infestations. Here the Salamanders were tasked with the arduous mission of purging this Xenos infestation from the moons of Yamari, long considered the cradle of this alien menace. In this theater, this chapter would endure staggering casualties, yet through the storms of Prometheum and the devastating impact of Thunderhammers, the Space Marines methodically eradicated the gene stealer threat, down to the last genome. For nearly 2 standard Terran years, the campaign unfolded amidst both darkness and death, until finally the Magos Biologus of the Adeptus Mechanicus pronounced the ancient menace upon the moon fully vanquished. Despite this victory, the shadow of Yamari's legacy and the losses to the chapter lingered within the derelict ships, aboard space hulks, and countless worlds already scarred by the alien menace's infestation. The next major incident of galactic import that the Salamanders would take a part in occurred in 761 M41, when Warpsmith Soulsmiter brought a horde of demon engines to the Great Crucible of Nocturne. Here the Salamanders' chapter master would authorize the opening of the chapter master's reliquaries, which included dozens upon dozens of meticulously crafted meltaguns, relic blades, and thunderhammers that were entrusted to the elite veterans within the Fire Drakes, each warrior swearing solemn oaths to honor the weapon's machine spirits through deeds of destruction. As they would be deployed aboard a dozen Stormraven gunships, the Fire Drakes would then descend upon the demon engines with unmatched ferocity, now wielding technology that was very well suspected to have been crafted by their gene sire. Hammer strikes and melta-blasts tore through the metallic monstrosities, while the accompanying Stormwing squadrons hunted the Soul Smiter himself, finally bringing the Warpsmith low, his body severed from its mechadendrils, and then mercilessly, and quite justly, riddled with gunfire until there was nothing left. Then the remaining pulp and meat juices would be launched into orbit ceremoniously straight into Nocturne's sun, as a final farewell and a warning to all those who attempt. Then, in a completely separate engagement, in 772 M41, Forge Father Vulkan Histan reclaimed the Gauntlet of Fire after defeating a war host of Eldar pirate Loth Bloodweaver, cementing his role as a chapter's living heir to Vulkan's legacy. Then would come the Lycanthos Drift campaign, occurring between 780 and 810 M41. During the closing stages of the Fourth Quadrant Rebellion, the Salamanders joined the Imperium's war efforts to reclaim one of Chaos's final bastions upon the material realm. Operating under Lufthuren of the Astral Claws, the chapter coordinated with elements of the Firehawks, the White Scars, and the Celestial Guard, all the while being supported by Imperial Guard regiments from Kalsek and the Death Corps of Krieg, as well as God engines from Legio Venictor. Over 2 decades of grueling warfare, the Salamanders helped secure the sector, culminating in the fall of Lycanthos Secundus into the Imperial fold. This led to bonds of brotherhood being forged throughout the campaign, which would resonate for decades to come, and culminate with the coming of the Badab War, which forced the Salamanders to act as mediators and combatants alike. In 878 M41, Forge Father Isstvan faced the Necron Overlord Trazen the Infinite in personal combat, all to protect the Spear of Vulkan from being claimed by the ancient Xenos Collector. The confrontation ended in Isstvan's triumph, preserving both the relic and the chapter's honor. Later would come the legendary and the rather unfortunate Badab War, occurring between 906 through 912 M41. Here the Salamanders would be drawn reluctantly into the internecine conflict of the Badab War, serving the Imperium against the renegade Astral Claws. Though initially hesitant, the chapter acted upon proof provided by the prosecuting Legiste Inquisitor, confirming the Astral Claws' betrayal, and in so they would send a single battle company, the second company under Captain Pelas Mirsan, as they were already heavily committed to another warfront. Despite their small numbers, the Salamanders engaged fiercely, influencing several pivotal points in the preceding events and maintaining the Imperium's tactical advantage. Then, in 938 M41, Tushan ascended to the role as regent of Prometheus, following the violent death of his predecessor at the hands of Huron Blackheart, who had at that time become the renegade Chaos Lord of the Red Corsairs, marking a veritable new chapter in the Salamanders' long and storied history. The Second War for Armageddon would be next, occurring between 941 and 961 M41. Under Tushan's command, the Salamanders distinguished themselves during the Second War for Armageddon. Amongst numerous feats, one company defended the River Stygius Bridge from a 1,000-strong Orc Speed Freaks force, safeguarding the critical water infrastructure to Hive Tempestora. While the Hive city would ultimately fall, their efforts established a safe evacuation route, preserving countless lives. Beyond the battlefield, the Salamanders excelled in vital yet underappreciated tasks, in particular, protecting the supply convoys, conducting rearguard actions, and escorting refugees to safety. The steadfast service earned the gratitude of thousands, from Imperial Guardsmen to civilian alike. In a notable engagement, Chapter Master Tushan and his fire drakes held back an overwhelming Orc force for days on end, a display of valor so profound that the legendary Commander Dante of the Blood Angels publicly commended Tushan before the assembled Imperial forces, a rare and rather supreme honor amongst the Adeptus Astartes, one that would later grow into a continuing friendship between the Salamanders and their vampiric kin. Through the time of ending, the Salamanders proved themselves to be one of the Imperium's most reliable shields, their willingness to protect humanity unwavering even amidst the countless trials directed upon them from the depths. In the last waning vestiges of the 41st Millennium, the Salamanders would continue to prove themselves as the true vigilant shield of the Imperium, bearing the burden that few others could. Their campaigns during this period are chronicled in both chapter records and scattered Imperial testimonies, revealing a mixture of heroism, tragedy, and an unshakable will. One such event would be the Torchan Crusade, occurring around 943 M41, when the Necron Overlord Trazen the Infinite claimed to have located the long-lost Song of Entropy, one of the missing relics of Vulkan, a claim which proved to be not but a cunning ruse designed to ensnare Forge Father Vulkan Isstvan. During the ensuing assault of Torchkan, the Necron forces of Tomb World Salamanders sought both the Spear of Vulkan and the death of its current bearer. The Salamander's 6th Company responded with defiance, as bolters and flamers blazed amidst the cold metallic rank of the Necrons. 40 battle brothers would fall in the struggle, but Isstvan ultimately prevailed, leaving the battle littered with countless permanently destroyed Necron forms, and the chapter was therefore left victorious, yet bloodied. Up next would be the Killianeth Rebellion, occurring in 955 M41. Amidst the chaos of the rebellion, Chapter Master Tushan faced mortal danger when a rebel Hellhound Flamer tank engulfed his position in a sheet of burning promethium, the insurgents' cheers quickly turned to utterances of horror as Tushan emerged from the inferno, seemingly impervious to flame, and struck down the hellhound with a single devastating blow from his legendary and powerful thunderhammer. Witnesses report that the rebels fled in abject fear, undone by the sight of the fire-wraithed Primarchs' heir. Later would come the assault on Moribar, where the Salamanders' 3rd Company under Captain Khotan Kadiai pursued the deranged former captain of the Black Dragons, Vaitan Ushrank, and a warband of Chaos Space Marines on the ash-blanketed cemetery world of Moribar. The battle raged throughout the Cementeria and the crypts as Urshuk sought forbidden secrets beneath the planet's sepulchres. Ultimately, Urshuk was cast into the central furnace of the world, while the loyal librarian Nihilan attempted to save his mentor, only to be horribly burned. Barely surviving from these ashes, Nalihan rose as a chaos sorcerer, forming the Dragon Warriors, a warband of heretic Astartes dedicated to vengeance against the Salamanders and Nocturne as a whole. And he would later orchestrate the downfall of Captain Kodiai on Stratos as a rather well-calculated act of reprisal. Following this would be the Sokorian prophecy, which occurred in 962 M41. Using intelligence gathered from the recovered derelict Adeptus Mechanicus forge ship Archimedes Rex, the 3rd Company journeyed to Socoria, where they discovered the remnants of the Imperium's 154th Expeditionary Fleet, 50 suits of ancient power armor, and Gravis, the oldest living salamander and a survival of the Dropsite Massacre. The company had captured an Iron Warrior's fortress, but soon faced overwhelming orc assaults. Displaying no small amount of ingenuity, the Fireborn utilized their downed strike cruiser's main guns to repel the Green Tide, forming a ramshackle, heavy gun emplacement. Though ultimately they would be rescued by a strike cruiser of the Marines' Malevolent. Thanks to the previous tensions, the chapters created no small amount of friction during this event. During the campaign, Captain Nihilan was allegedly slain by an orc commando team. Nihilan was sighted in the area but escaped, carrying with him a seismic cannon, a weapon of apocalyptic potential, now, unfortunately, in the hands of Chaos. Dissension followed the return to Nocturne, as multiple failures and the loss of their captain weighed heavily upon the 3rd Company. Eventually, the Salamanders would have to take part in the Stratos campaign, where they would spearhead the liberation of Sirion, the floating capital of the mining world of Stratos. There, a small cadre of dragon warriors, led by Chaos Sorcerer Nihilan, orchestrated an uprising of the so-called Cult of Truth, using this as a distraction to recover the artifact known as the Decipherex from the city's depths. Responding swiftly to Stratos' astropathic distress signals, the Salamanders intervened, only to witness Nihilan personally extract vengeance by orchestrating the death of Captain Khotan Kadiai, a revered officer whose previous actions on Moribur had directly claimed the Chaos Sorcerer's leader's life. In the last few closing decades of M41, the Salamanders endured some of their most relentless campaigns, standing as both guardians and avengers across countless war zones. Wreathed in fire and bathed in flame, each engagement tested the limits of their courage, ingenuity, and their devotion to humanity, as their deeds would be recorded in the many scattered history books of the Imperium's countless worlds. Here would occur the defense of Nocturne in 975 M41, when the Salamanders unified in full force to defend Nocturne and its moon Prometheus against the heretical dragon warriors led by Chaos Sorcerer Nihilan. Following the death of his old adversary, Captain Kodiai, Nihilan enlisted the aid of a warband of iron warriors to mine the rare Frey ore from Scoria. During this time, the Chaos Sorcerer entered a demonic pact with Enshulkach, enhancing his psychic powers to depths he'd never dreamed of. Gaining access to forbidden knowledge, Keely the secrets of the ancient Nocturnian corpse masters, capable of resurrecting the dead Nihilan sought to return his former master back to life, the renegade Black Dragon's chaplain, Victan Usharok. Well, rather than life, he would come to unlife. In exchange, the demon would be granted a host body, manifesting in the material realm as a demon host, sowing chaos amongst the Salamanders for as long as it could. Nihilan deployed the seismic cannon, which had been safely stored aboard his ship that had been previously stolen, as the Chaos Cruiser Hellstalker burrowed a shaft straight into the depths of Mount Deathfire and into the sacred heart of Nocturne. There he breached the hidden shrine containing one of Vulkan's many lost relics, the Tome of Fire. Here he would be confronted by his former pupil, Epistolary Pyreal, in a psychic duel that ended with Pyreal's death, a costly yet crucial sacrifice. Soon after, Chief Librarian Velcorna arrived to confront Nihilan within the very depths of the mountain itself. Though Vihilra destroyed Nihilan's bodyguard, Remlek, the Chaos Sorcerer escaped. His hopes for reviving his former master and now near obsession temporarily dashed, but yet his goal undiminished. His current whereabouts remain unknown. However, the ghost of the threat that he poses to the Salamanders still remains in full. Following this would be the Promethean War occurring in 980 M41. On the Ecclesiarchy's world of Helestian, the Salamander's 6th Company, commanded by Captain Uzrang Drakgard and reinforced by the 4th Company's assault squads, waged a bitter war of attrition against the Black Legion and the Children of Torment, and they would ally briefly with the Order of the Ebon Chalice. The Salamanders and the Imperial forces executed a successful breakthrough, yet the Sisters of Battle would go on to abandon their allies in order to pursue undisclosed agendas, turning what would be a victory into a chaotic rout. Then, during 989 M41, the 3rd Company deployed upon the death world of Mainz, reinforcing the Katachan regiments stationed there, the Black Snakes, against a tendril of High Fleet Leviathan. Over the following weeks of grueling, unending combat, the Salamanders and their Astra Militarum allies reduced swaths of Mayas to ashes and cinder before finally purging the Xenos threat entirely. Following this would be the Blood Purge Crusade in 989 M41. And once again, the Salamanders would end up in an alliance with another friend from the Imperium. This time it was the Ironhawk, where both would have to work closely together to strike at the corrupted shrine world of Lamath's Hope. Defeating the demonic legions of Krorar Seth. Following the death of this demon, the Salamanders completed the cleansing rituals and purged the world of all corruption by fire, withdrawing once the task was fully complete. Then would come the Third War for Armageddon in 998 M41, when Orc warlord Gazgul Mag Uruk-Draka launched a new offensive on Armageddon. The Salamanders were amongst the first to respond, and all 7 companies would be fully deployed, with Chapter Master Thushan leading his own elite 1st Company, the Fire Drakes. The Salamanders assaulted rock forts alongside the Hemlock River, preferring close quarters combat within the mazes of these crude tunnels, rather than the open range engagement which many of the other Imperial forces much preferred. At least 3 rocks were destroyed, slaying around 1,000 orcs in short order. Unlike many of the chapters who in this great war sought glory or redemption, the Salamanders primarily focused on saving and preserving the lives of as many civilians as possible, as they openly challenged a captain of the Marines Malevolent who had abandoned civilians to die and rather used them as bait in order to trap orcs in a brutal pincer. Though the bulk of the chapter would withdraw after Gazgul's retreat, 2 companies remained to guard key population centers, fighting through the Season of Fire, while others could not due to their own divergent physiology. In one notable instance, a squad of fire drakes departed for Baal, serving as the Blood Angels' honor guard for the fallen Captain Erasmus Tycho, and they did this in full military regalia and force in order to ensure the nun maintained the procession of their fallen friend's funeral. This has been one of the many instances where the Salamanders' long-lasting friendship and the loyalty they feel towards the Blood Angels was openly shown. As the galaxy plunged deeper into the Era Indomitus, the Imperium faced a tide of threats, both alien and heretical. Amongst the most vibrant of defenders were the Salamanders, who exemplified their service through courage, resilience, and the unyielding will of their Primarch. Their deeds during this period would mark them as both saviors and martyrs for the cause of the Imperium, as in the Largos system, the warp storms emerging from the Great Rift brought forth a maelstrom of death uncountable. From the storms materialized bloodthirster Kazkul and his Rage Legion, intent on unending slaughter and the enslavement of the rather dense population across this system, only to be stopped by the Salamanders deploying at full chapter strength. And they arrived to halt the massacre. Waves of repulsor tanks smashed through the walls of the blood factories, followed by Primarchs aggressor squads who seemed to almost have been tailor-designed to be used by the Salamanders, as they purged the infernal installations with cleansing fire. Hive by hive, planet by planet, the Salamanders liberated those they could and extracted a toll of vengeance uncountable upon those lost, leaving a scorched testimony to their fury, as the legendary Bloodthirster would be forced back upon a pyre of fire unending. Veterans of this campaign bore numerous badges of service, some recalling prior conflicts against demons. Their vows were now reiterated and even changed. All Necrons would be destroyed, and demons would be cleansed forever from the Materium. After this would come the Third War of Deimos. The world of Deimos would once again fall under siege, this time by the Necron Saskan dynasty. Overstretched, the Ultramarines had few Astartes to spare, leading to them having to send a small strike force, alongside regiments of Ultramar's Auxilia. Yet even their combined strength, bolstered by their successor chapters, the Iron Hounds, the Brazen Consuls, and the Liberators, they struggled to stem the tide of endless Necron, who continued to arrive upon the planet via tomb ships and a Dolam Gate. It was only thanks to the timely arrival of the Salamanders and the White Scars that the tides were able to be shifted. Responding to the Ultramarines' call for aid, they joined the battle to reclaim Deimos for the Emperor, coordinated with a precision that only the closest of allies could dare to have, allowed their firepower to decisively hold back the tide, allowing the beleaguered world to push the Xenos out of their sector. From here, the Salamanders would be drawn into the Taldas War. During the Taldas War, Captain Perlas Mirsan of the Second Company commanded a demi-company of Salamanders in the defense of the cardinal world of Benediction in the Virtus subsector. As the word-bearers closed upon the Grand Honorificum Cathedral City Complex, the main Cathedral City Complex, the faith of the Adeptus Mechanicus priests and the loyal citizens invoked a phenomenal psychic awakening. Skull-faced spirits of imperial dead emerged from the warp, encasing the cathedral city walls in a radiant power known as the Saint's Wall, banishing the demons that aided the word-bearers back into the Immaterium. Seizing this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, the Salamanders struck with full force, cutting down the divided enemy, pushing through the bridge over the River Carmine, and cutting the heretic forces in two. While the battle for Benediction had not been fully decided, the word-bearers' assault had been repelled, and an uncountable amount of their forces, many of whom were veterans of the Long War, had been cut down, leaving the cathedral city in loyalist hands. Yet Dark Cardinal Cor Ferron, commanding Chaos forces, remained unyielding in his designs for Benediction. As the Era Indomitus reaches its zenith, the Salamanders continue to save human lives, as they live through the enduring principles instilled into the chapter by their Primarch, of courage in the face of insurmountable odds, steadfast loyalty to the Imperium, and the unshakable devotion to protect the innocent across the now warpstorm systems of both Imperium, Nihilus, and Sanctus, and against both Xenos and heretical threats. The chapter's legacy of fire and steel has persisted and become a veritable beacon of hope amidst a galaxy shattered by the shadow of chaos.